Welcome to the fourth day of the Earth Day Week broadcast, brought to you by We Don't Have Time, Earth Day Network, and Exponential Roadmap. Today's theme is food and agriculture. And this is the largest climate conference in 2020 so far. We have viewers watching from more than 140 countries. My name is Katarina Rolfsdotter Jansson, and I am the program host.
Today, young people from all over Philadelphia came out to start putting some beauty back into...
Coming into Philadelphia about an hour and a half ago, it doesn't make sense.
I don't want anything to get in our way.
Participamos da Revolução de 1900.
The effects of the flood are still devastating.
Starvation to get a lot worse.
The epic fire season.
Climate change is happening now. The Earth is burning.
New vision that changed the conversation.
Most likely battery-operated vehicles.
This Climate Student International, what is it? Keep an eye on these wonderful people doing their utmost for the future of the next generation.
Mike won't want to hear this, but I'm done with fossil fuels.
Climate change, fighting climate change.
Take climate change into account.
And financial giants moving trillions to attain net zero carbon.
Am I right?
I think it would have an impact to halve emissions by 2030.
A few minutes ago.
In Davos, you've seen it, you heard it, you've read it.
It required good education.
Climate change, fighting climate change. Business is not doing enough. And what's the way forward?
With me here in the studio, I have Ingmar Rentzhog, CEO and founder of We Don't Have Time, Nick Nuttall from Earth Day Network, and Johan Falk from Exponential Roadmap. Ingmar, what has the interest been so far for the broadcast?
I would say exponential. The world needs to have the climate conversation open, and we had so far had articles over 50 newspapers throughout the world, radio and TV, and also about 500,000 viewers on social media each day. That's fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to today and tomorrow and to the hackathon on Saturday.
Wonderful. Johan Falk, why is the theme food and agriculture important?
Well, firstly, we are in a very critical situation. We all know that. What I really love with this conference is that we're focusing on the solutions and how we can scale the solutions. And the movement towards plant-rich food is absolutely a game changer. We see that consumers starting to demand new type of food, and we see a tremendous innovation from a lot of companies all over the world. So I'm actually very optimistic, and it will be very exciting today.
Thank you, Johan Falk. And Nick Nuttall, how about you? What are your thoughts for today?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. Food goes to the heart of all our lives and all our possibilities for any kind of future. And I think there are two sides to this coin. One is all the food we waste, which is completely mad. 1/3 of all the world's food is wasted or lost. And we can all do something about that wherever we are. And also this hidden story really for many people, which is the loss of productive land because it's been treated by intensive agriculture or other influences. And I'm so looking forward to hearing Ibrahim in just a few minutes on this issue of degraded land.
Thank you. It's now an honor to introduce Ibrahim Chow, Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification.
40 years ago, Ibrahim Chow trained as a forester with an interest in sustainability. Today, he is the UN Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the UN Conventions to Combat Desertification. Ibrahim's current work is focused on early actions governments can take to minimize the likelihood of drought impacts becoming disasters. Last year, he helped 196 countries agree to address flawed land tenure regimes, which could be a game changer for food security, climate change emissions, and the global empowerment of women in rural regions. In his home village in Mauritania, he's also influencing environmental knowledge and behavior to pass on a world of beauty and wonder to the children.
Welcome to the broadcast, Mr. Chow. It's magnificent to have you with us. And please share your presentation.
Thank you very much. And dear friends, first of all, let me thank you all to the organizers for being so creative. We are living in a very difficult period at the moment. So thank you for taking the time to engage in this important event. 50 years ago, Americans mobilized the world to demand a new contract with nature. Earth Day was born. The very name of the day of our planet tells us a lot about who we are as species. We are creatures of the earth, the soil, the land. Without healthy and productive land, we could not live. Can you even imagine a planet on which nothing grew? No crops, no grass, no trees. It is unthinkable. And yet, we, the people of the earth, do not treat the land with the respect it deserves. As humanity grows larger and wealthier, agriculture, urban spaces, and infrastructure are eating into the land. Almost 3/4 of all land has been transformed from its natural state, and the pace of conversion is accelerating. 2 billion hectares of once productive land, an area larger than South America, has been degraded, adversely affecting billions of people in the world. The health and productivity of existing land is declining, accelerated by climate change. This has caused many problems and is storing up more for the future. An inability to feed growing populations, falling biodiversity, and shrinking ecosystems, hitting the planet's ability to provide basic services, accelerating climate change. Our unhealthy relationship with the land, with nature, is also in part responsible for the COVID-19 crisis. COVID-19 is an infectious disease caused by a virus that spilled over from a wild animal to humans. It has wreaked havoc on lives, livelihoods, economies, and communities. It signals that our social contract with nature is a global priority now more than ever before. It tells us that land health, ecosystem health, and human health are tied together. Since Earth Day was created, we have put in place many systems and processes to try and arrest the decline of land. We have the Rio Conventions of biodiversity, desertification, climate change. We have the Paris Agreement. We have the global goals. These are milestones to be proud of. However, if we are being honest, we have to say that the world has yet to deliver on the promises made under these agreements. We need to mobilize the world to forge a stronger, healthier, and more productive life in harmony with nature for years to come. Today, as part of these efforts, we are going to specifically look at agriculture and climate change. In this regard, let me offer 3 insights. Insight 1, agriculture is hugely vulnerable to climate change, but it is also a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, when fully accounted for, emissions for agriculture are much higher than generally reported. Agriculture emissions are not 23%, but 37% of all emissions when you add the pre- and post-production costs. Costs such as refrigeration, food transportation, or fertilizer production. Insight number 2, globalization means that land degradation today is driven primarily by poor land uses for distant, not local consumers, for example, urban or foreign consumers. This removes the oversights consumers had over local ecosystems, ensuring their functioning well. This disconnect is aiding agriculture emission. Insight number three, land-based mitigation actions are effective now, not later, because this potential falls with every year of delayed action. What's more, harnessing that potential now brings additional benefits that go beyond mitigation. Enhancing land anywhere enhances health and life everywhere. Dear friends, fundamentally, the challenge we face with agriculture is one of land management. We need to produce more food for growing population while reducing emissions. We need to do so without expending on degraded land. To do so, we need to sustainably manage the land. With this in mind, please allow me to lay out 4 pathways to a meaningful social contract with nature in the context of agriculture, land use, and climate change. The first pathway is treating land as a limiting factor in our development and land use planning processes. Much of human development has been built on the idea that the planet is limitless. A field stops producing, slash and burn the forest to create a new one. Cities getting overcrowded, expand out into the countryside. Roads are too busy, widen existing roads or build new ones. We can't keep doing this. If natural land continues to be converted for agriculture to feed a projected population of 10 billion people, only 10% of natural land will be left by 2050. Continuing with business as usual will increase land emissions while stripping the land's capacity to sequester carbon. All development must be based on the idea that land is a limiting factor. This brings us to the second pathway, which is improving the use of existing land. As demand for agricultural land grows, trade-offs among competing objectives of inland grow too. But we must not burn our way to prosperity and damage the land systems we live off. Instead, let us forge global partnerships that promise a more prosperous future by ensuring we plan and use our land well, doing the right things in the right place at the right scales. For example, planning urban spaces so that they don't encroach into agricultural land, and by ensuring we only use the land we have already converted. We need to incentivize agriculture techniques that keep land healthy or recover lost productivity, such as conservation agriculture or agroforestry. Sustainable land management techniques keep land productive, produce more with less, and slow land conversion. The third pathway is recovering what has been lost. We are gearing up for the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. I have some good news for you today. The land degradation neutrality targets nations are setting under the convention ahead foresee great restoration plans. The restoration of land is central to healthy agriculture, a cooler planet, restoring biodiversity, and reigniting economic growth at a time of great economic turmoil. Let me explain with an example. The Great Green Wall for the Sahara and the Sahel initiatives involves 11 African countries. It's an 8,000-kilometer long ecosystem innovation along the southern border of the Sahara Desert, from Dakar, Senegal in West Africa, to Djibouti by the Red Sea on the coast, on the east. This program is sequestering carbon in the soil up to 250 million tons of carbon through new vegetation cover and increased organic matter. But it's doing a lot more. It is improving access to water, food, and energy for communities that typically live off wild animals, trees, and animals. Partnerships with ethical supply chains from Europe and the United States are helping poor households to produce sustainably goods for local and global consumption. Local governments are creating jobs for the young people that terrorists preyed on. And rural women are owning land. Inspired by this model, parties to our convention are replicating it widely in what they often refer to as achieving land degradation neutrality. The fourth pathway is encouraging more responsible consumption and production. What we buy, where we buy it, and how we use it has a massive impact on land. 1/3 of all food produced each year is lost or wasted. This is a footprint of 1.4 billion hectares, close to 30% of the world's agricultural land area. But it isn't just food. Food with a large environmental footprint and throwaway fashion are also damaging the land. Changing our diets and shopping behaviors can free up land and lower the carbon emissions that we all care about. Dietary change alone can free up between 80 and 240 million hectares of land. We must change attitude to consumptions and production, as the UNCCD is doing in this year's Desertification and Drought Day on 17th of June by encouraging people to look at sustainable use of food, feed, and fiber. But personal choices will only matter where they are backed by full transparency in the value chain, allowing consumers to make the right choices. Business must step up too. Time is running on, colleagues, so let me conclude by a challenge to young people who are the torchbearers of sustainable development. Children, young people, and millennials make up 77% of all global population. You are not the future, you are the present. But even if the future is one of the cities and technologies, we are still the people of the earth. You are the people of the earth. Without land, you have nothing. Without land, you are nothing. What personal choices will you make for recovery, for the recovery efforts from COVID-19 and for a healthier planet? I urge you and everyone else to recommit what Earth Day is all about and mobilize the world to create a healthier future for all. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim Chow, for that wonderful presentation. With me, next to me here, I have a former colleague of yours,
yes.
Nick Nuttall from Earth Day. Please bring some questions in from the audience to Mr. Chow.
Yes, I'm going to be a bit cheeky because I actually would like to ask a question myself. So, Ibrahim, great to see you and great presentation. So, I think that, in a sense, land degradation has been a bit of the Cinderella, the poor relation to maybe the other big agreements like climate change and biodiversity. But I suspect that its time has come, because I cannot see, and this is the question, that we will deal with climate change or feeding a growing population without healing and restoring the degraded land. I think your moment has arrived. Is this correct?
That's correct. We have a growing population and we absolutely need to feed them. But if you reduce the food we waste, and if we reduce the impact we are having on biodiversity, and if we want to fight climate change, we have to manage our land. We are terrestrial species as human beings. Therefore, we have no other planet to live in other than land. So land conservation and land degradation, achieving land degradation neutrality is a major contributor to the other two objectives you mentioned, climate and biodiversity. But there's more than that. With land, you create jobs. So you have recovery to the COVID-19 crisis. With land, you reduce immigration, illegal immigration. Why people are migrating? Because they have no other choice in their own countries. With land, you reduce the security challenge that the world is facing. While people are fighting each other, why? Between farmers and pastoralists, because they are fighting for land and water. So with land conservation and land degradation, you respond to multiple objectives of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you. COVID-19 has indeed exposed the vulnerability of our food supply chain systems. How do you think this exposure of the vulnerability will affect how we look at food supply chains?
COVID-19 gave us a moment to reflect and to take a step back and to see how we can build better, how we can build back with a stronger and more resilient world. You can have the billions of dollars, you can have the trillions of dollars, but if you do not have food, if you do not have healthy land, you end up having a population that is not healthy. So the long-term recovery is essentially based on land use management. We consider land use management and land restoration as part of the solution to COVID-19 crisis. We are facing right now a health crisis, but we are also facing an economic crisis and a social crisis. But the economic and social crisis are essentially being provided by land. I mean, you see a number of reactions, positive reactions today. Because the borders are closed, people are going back to their land. People are being fed by local producers. That is positive because unless you have an oversight on how much land is being used in your territory, you are powerless. You have no power to manage how people living thousands of kilometers far away are going to affect your land. So we feel that there is a package. COVID-19 is a challenge, but it is at the same time an opportunity that we need to seize.
Well, thank you very much for coming to our program and sharing your insights, Mr. Chow. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And let's now move to a news sweep.
The soil beneath our feet is getting poorer, but the Land Institute is attempting to develop a new generation of perennial crops that can supplement and even replace our existing annual crops. For example, kernza, which is an annual wheat that grows year after year. People call him Iceman. Johan Norfei, a 79-year-old civil engineer from Ladakh, India, has for his whole life been living in a land of high passes. Norfei invents artificial glaciers and constructs massive dams in order to efficiently use the water gathered from melting ice, thereby changing the lives of even the most skeptical farmers. A real climate hero. Justin Trudeau's government is preparing a multi-billion aid package to oil companies. This should be an opportunity to reposition and transition to carbon zero 2050. Bail out workers directly, not companies. The world's biggest climate polluter, Saudi Aramco, announced the world's biggest stock flotation in the ultimate marriage of carbon and capitalism. On its first day of trade, Saudi Aramco became the most valuable listed company in history, after pushing its market value to $1.9 trillion. Solar foods are turning water into food. Scientists are replacing crops and livestock with food made from microbes and water. Solar Foods from Finland have created a revolutionary way to produce natural protein by using renewable electricity, air and water. This is an entirely new kind of food that is both natural and free from the burdens of agriculture and aquaculture. Many new innovations are being scaled up within the agriculture and food production sector. Visit our app, view these climate reviews and create your own. Maybe someone on today's show deserves some climate love.
And let's now take a look at how the app works.
Do you want to act on the climate crisis but don't know how? With our app, you can send climate reviews to organizations and leaders. Our team reaches out to the organization to encourage dialogue. Just download We Don't Have Time. Tap the green Create button and choose Type of Review. Give climate love to people doing great stuff. Create a climate idea to suggest a solution. Or send a climate warning to those who hurt the planet. To increase your impact, you can share the review, because when enough people agree with you, organizations and leaders will change. Many even want your opinion, because we have to work together. Do you want to be part of the solution?
We We now have a panel discussion coming up. But first, the three panelists will present their cases. And this panel has an expert. Her name is Memta Mera. So let's take a look at a video from the first presenter, Alexsandra Guerra.
Meet Alexsandra Guerra of NORI, which is working to reverse climate change by enabling global-scale carbon removal and storage. Carbon offsets are common these days, but 98% don't actually remove past carbon from the atmosphere. NORI is building a marketplace in which anyone can support carbon removal, either removing it directly or paying for its removal. In one initiative, NORI pays farmers to improve the health of their soil by storing carbon in it. Already more than 400 people and organizations have been able to pay for carbon removal with the first farmer in the program. Alexsandra is a clean energy crusader, an engineer by training and one of last year's Greenpeace 30 Under 30.
Hi there, Alexsandra. So how has your fantastic work been received so far?
It's been received really well. I think, we work mainly with farmers. So we're a carbon removal marketplace, and we, essentially provide carbon removal or carbon credits. But we chose to focus on regenerative agriculture because of all of the reasons that Ibrahim and Nick just outlined. And for the most part, farmers are very, very excited. They're looking for a price on carbon. They want to restore their soil. They want to restore their land, but they need a financial incentive to do so, and NORI does that.
Well, it's really a win-win. Wonderful work. Well, you stay on for the panel, please, okay? Great. Let's go to the next case. It's OrganoClick.
This is Morten Hellberg, co-founder and CEO of the green chemical and material technology company OrganoClick. The production and incineration of fossil-based plastics emitted 850 million tons of CO2 last year and creates a huge amount of plastic waste in the oceans and on the ground. Plastic-based non-degradable binding materials are often used with other materials, for example in films for purportedly compostable agriculture mulch. As an alternative, OrganoClick offers the only bio-based biodegradable binder on the market. It's developed from food product waste like orange peels, oat husks and shrimp shells. Morten has been part of transforming OrganoClick from a university spin-off in 2006 to an industrial company.
Hi, Morten. How can your technique be used to enhance the productivity in the agriculture sector?
As explained in this movie, one of the things that you do in order to increase productivity is to use mulch films on farmlands. That is
films?
Yes, mulch films. It's in order to create a microclimate that is improving the productivity of the crop. However, these mulch films are made by plastics today. And only in the European Union, 15,000 tons of plastics are being left on the farmlands, which creates microplastics, which it reduces the fertility of the farmland. We, together with a partner, have developed a biodegradable mulch film by biopolymers coming from orange peels, oat husks, and shrimp shells. So that is one of our innovations that we've been making.
Wonderful work. Thank you very much. And stay on for the panel. The next case is from Desert Control.
This is Ole Christian Sivertsen, CEO of climate tech company Desert Control. Global warming causes lands to degrade, deserts to spread, and temperatures to rise in a vicious cycle. This cripples ecosystems crucial for carbon dioxide uptake and keeping nature in balance to support life on Earth. Desert Control's solution is a compound of clay and water that enhances the health of sandy arid soils, reducing salinity and improving absorption and retention of water and nutrients. Restoring unproductive land and making deserts farmable can take 7 to 15 years. Soil treated with Desert Control solution can be planted within 7 hours.
Hello there. Oh, there you are. Great to see you. So turning sand into soil, it sounds too good to be true. What's the secret?
Well, we have simply made it easy to apply natural clay to sandy soils. Clay-rich soil retains more water and has higher resilience to droughts and climate change. But mixing clay into soil has always been difficult, though. I mean, if you ever held a lump of sticky clay in your hands, you can probably imagine why. So we therefore invented a way to turn clay into a liquid with a viscosity close to water. This liquid is sprayed onto the sandy soil and percolates down, forming a 40 to 60 centimeter deep layer that retains the water like a sponge. So water and nutrients that otherwise would just trickle through the sand remains available for life to grow. That enhances biodiversity and soil health, and thus also increasing the survival rate for a wide range of fauna as a lasting solution to restore and protect land from desertification and climate change.
Thank you very much, Ole Christian. And on this panel that we're just going to start, we have an expert. It's Mamta Mehra. Let's see the presentation of her.
Meet Mamta Mehra. Having researched and worked with climate change, agriculture, and natural resource management, today she is a senior fellow at Project Jordan, focusing on land use and food sector solutions for removing carbon from the atmosphere.
Hello there, all of you back on the screen, and there's Mamta with us. Fantastic to see you. So Mamta, do you have any questions to the case presenters immediately?
Sure. For NORI, I mean, this is very interesting. As you mentioned that this is a financial incentive, especially to the regenerative farmers. I would like to know that what are the mechanisms you have set to, for those carbon pricing, and are they varies for different practices across different geographies?
That's a really good question. So we don't prescribe practices at all. However, we're outcomes based. So a farmer can enter in their data and say, we've planted corn in this field, and they outline it like on Google Maps type of thing. And they say they did certain types of irrigation, minimal tillage, low tillage, whatever it is. They provide all the information on how they grew that crop, the yield, etc. And that leads us to an outcomes-based model. So we use Comet Farm, which is a USDA-funded tool, as our partner. They estimate how much carbon is removed on the land given those certain practices. So we don't say, we'll give you $15 per ton because you do low till. It's all based off of your region and very specific to what you're growing. And that's run through the model. And the farmers get to choose. They get to choose their price. So we want to create a marketplace with complete price discovery where farmers get to say, look, this cost me $10 per acre to do. I want to do $15 per ton. And right now we only have a few handful of farmers who are selling at $15 per ton. And NORI takes a transaction fee. That's how we make our money. It's very small, 15%, which is immensely more favorable to farmers compared to other registries in the past. It's because the credits changes hands a lot. For NORI, it's like automatically retired because we use the blockchain. And then in the future, we're really hoping that this gets really large so we can trade carbon removal like a commodity. So you can have large businesses or organizations or cities or governments paying or bidding for carbon removal and farmers offering their prices and settling on one price.
Thank you, Alexsandra. Do you have more questions, Mamta, to the other panelists?
Sure. I mean, for Martin, I would like to know, how these bio-based, biodegradable binders work over, the conventional one. Is there any limitation? Particularly, I want to know if we want to upscale these technologies and in innovation at the global scale. And for Ole, I would know, 7 hours, really? You can convert a desert into a healthy soil. So do you share some of the success stories where, these things have really helped to the farming communities? Thank you.
We've been really looking into where do we have a lot of waste and side streams in the food industry. And here we've seen that the orange peels, for example, there is a lot of orange peels coming out from juice production. So there is millions of tons of this on the global scale. The same is right for oat husks. There's a lot of oat production as well as wheat bran. So we really used side streams from big scale production of different type of foods. Right now, we have developed binders that it can replace plastic polymers that is implemented now in biocomposites and also in non-woven materials. And really right now, the raw material is not the limitation. Now we are working together with global companies that are implementing these technologies into their various products, like mulch films, for example, which is one of the examples, but it can also be napkins, it can be tabletop products and other things. But the mulch film, I'm really think this is a great thing because currently 100,000 tons of mulch films are used in the European Union alone, and they are made mainly of plastic materials. And that creates microplastics 15,000 tons per year in the European Union alone, which is accumulating in the earth. Right now, we are testing these new mulch shrimps in Italy and in Australia, as well as in US. So we have a number of networks of big industrial farmers that is now using the mulch shrimps we have developed with these biopolymers, and they degrade completely afterwards, creating no microplastics, and those not implementing bad or worse fertility of the soil. So this is something I think is very, very exciting that we're coming out with right now.
Thank you, Morten. And you had a question, Mamta, that you already posed to Ole. Is this really, really working?
Yeah, so let me comment on the 7th hour aspect. And as we all know, I mean, it takes years and decades to cultivate, a live organic soil. So when we talk about 7 hours, it's 7 hours from a very sandy soil or desert sand has received the treatment and has the capability to retain water and nutrients so that this life can start to regrow again. So basically what happens with a desertification process is that the organic matter disappears and it's only the mineral base that is left, which is sand and silt and things that, water would trickle through just like a colander, basically. So what we do when we have applied the clay to the soil again, it's ready to be planted, as part of the treatment process or within 7 hours of treatment.
Fantastic. These are all such hopeful invention. It's really, really wonderful to hear. Nick, what questions do we have from the viewers?
Yes. So this is obviously a very interesting topic. So quite a few. There's a question here from Johannes, who has got a question here to Alexsandra. How many hectares or acres have enrolled in your program so far?
That's a really good question. Right now, we have one project that is about 7,000 acres that has been listed and sold all their credits. We have a pipeline of over 300,000 acres between qualified and unqualified. So we are hoping to bring more farmers on as quickly as possible. And that's all I feel comfortable sharing with right now.
All right. More questions, please, Nick.
Yeah, so many of them here. So a bit of a polarizing question, really, from somebody called Sneha Verma. Agriculture is a very controversial topic in some areas. I'm paraphrasing this a bit. I think the question is, how does your work contribute to promoting organic food production? And can it speed up organic food production? Is that one of your aims, or is it not an aim at all?
Is that for me?
No,
I think that's all of you. Any of you can
everybody.
Absolutely. I can take that first. The mulch shrimps that have been developed together with the partner, it has been certified for organic farming, as well as vegan certified. So this is really going towards the organic farming and really closing the circuit here, coming from agricultural waste and then going back with the material and creating more nutrient for the soil instead of creating microplastics. So this is really a goal for us to improve organic farming.
Great. So how about your soil solution, Ole Christian?
Well, absolutely. And I think, one of the big climate challenges that we have is leaching of all the various chemicals and fertilizers that we're adding as well. So we're definitely focused on making sure that the soils that we treat and create from sandy soils and deserts truly can retain the water and nutrients. And I believe strongly in the combination of sustainable land management practices, regenerative agriculture and organic farming as, must-have parts of a total solution.
Well, thank you. I'm sure you have more questions, Nick.
Yes. So there's a very question here from somebody called Mahama Sainu Saidu, if I've got it right, sorry about that. Very much focusing on Africa, where you have the multiple challenges of often mines or illegal mines, which I know take the land out of production, and the pollution of water bodies is a big challenge. How do you feel your various products can actually help in Africa in terms of bringing back the land or more sustainable agriculture to feed people?
Well, I can start on my side here, and I think the combination of restoring a degraded land and protecting land from degradation goes hand in hand with water scarcity. More than 70% of all fresh water in the world is consumed by agriculture. So in terms of Africa, to combine these solutions, to make sure we address both water scarcity, availability, and high utilization, and water efficiency of the crops that we are growing, and healthy and hardy crops in these environments is definitely a very, very important contribution to the way Africa can boost its productivity again in agriculture.
Would you like to add, Alexsandra or Mamta?
Yeah, I would like to say to this question as well as to the previously asked question that if you see a lot of drawdown land and food-based solutions, you will find enormous opportunities how we can sustainably produce food, fiber, while preserving and protecting our natural ecosystem. While right now the focus is at the global scale, but I believe many of those solutions might work at the African scale, for sure.
Thank you. Speaking of solutions and innovation. All three of you are innovators. You work with these fantastic ideas. Many people might be watching these and thinking, how do I get started with an innovation if they have an idea connected to food and agriculture? What advice can you share?
Well, I think, drawdown solutions starts from, at every level. There are a lot of opportunities and solutions you can practice at an individual level. For example, favoring plant-rich diet over reducing meat consumption. That is an individual dietary behavior one can practice. And there are collective actions which we can do at the community scale, at the national scale, which are, where you need more efforts from different stakeholders. So that's how one has to approach that, what they can do at the individual level and what at the society we have the opportunity to go forward.
Completely agree. And I think combining the global level and the big picture with sort of these smaller actions is extremely important. And I'd like to bring forward the Great Green Wall Initiative as a good example here.
Fantastic.
I mean, the vision there is really to grow an 8,000 kilometer green wall across Africa to stop the deadly advance of the Sahara Desert. And these 100 million hectares would sequester 250 million tons of carbon and create millions of jobs and feed the Sahel region, as we heard earlier. But this vision of the wall, however, is broken into a mosaic of small green pieces, and focus within each piece of the mosaic and multiplying pieces fast reduce the risk and accelerates the progress dramatically. And then suddenly, when all the pieces finally connect, it forms this majestic Great Green Wall that is visible even from space. So think big, act small, but start small, but act really, really fast. That's the way to combine this.
Thank you. Nick, another question?
My God, it's question time today.
Yes.
That's good news. Yeah. So a very specific question from Samuel to OrganoClick anyway, which is, you mentioned some countries you were working in, but do you really think you're ready to go global with this? And what's the barrier to going global?
Absolutely. We are working together with global partners that is already working on a global scale. Ourselves, we have a factory where we are producing currently 2,000 tons of our different products, and we can scale it up quite rapidly to a number of 10,000 tons. So we are already in business, but we are now working towards going to different global countries. But this is we're working together with global companies. These are.
Thank you. All three of you, and Mamta, of course, but all three of you that are innovators, what can you learn from each other's processes and ideas?
I think there's a lot of opportunity for synergies here because we're all working on land-based solutions. Yes. There's a lot of land-based opportunities to restore our lands. And so, Ole, for example, I think what you guys are doing is really great to restore desertified lands. And so it almost, to me, and this happens a lot for us in our work at NORI, is we get people who come to us with aligned solutions that don't necessarily directly impact each other. and an ecosystem where we could refer certain, clients or customers. So say we have a farmer who enrolls their project into NORI's carbon removal marketplace. They might have some land that's gone, quite sandy and they want to restore it. And it might not be directly related to their crop producing land, but at least to provide them that information and say, hey, look at these partners or these other organizations that can provide you additional solutions. Same thing with water rights. I think it's more about getting collective buy-in and building kind of like a repository of these are the different types of solutions for different problems that you might see with regard to land, and providing that information openly to anybody who's looking to use them.
Wonderful. Well, this is what we're doing on this program, sharing solutions, sharing knowledge, and just moving on, because we do not have much time. Thank you so much, the panelists. And Mamta Mehra, you will be staying on for a keynote presentation. So thank you, and thank you, Nick, for the questions. We will now move on to the segment Doers and Thinkers, and where Mamta Mehra is the keynote speaker.
My name is Mamta Mehra, and I'm the Senior Fellow with Project Drawdown, a leading think tank on climate solutions based in California, United States. Here we are trying to shift the global conversation on climate change from fear and negativity to hope, possibility, action, and empowerment. Today, my focus will be on food and land-based solutions to see their potential in achieving drawdown. But what is drawdown? Drawdown is a point in time when the atmospheric concentration of greenhouse gas emissions begin to decline on a year-to-year basis. And this is important because the concentration of greenhouse gas emissions are increasing year by year. And at Project Drawdown, all of our efforts are going to find ways to achieve drawdown by 2050 or sooner, because we really don't have time to fix this problem. And we strongly believe that this problem can be fixed with the solutions that already exist. Those solutions that already exist, and we have done the mapping, modeling, measuring of a collective array of substantive solutions to reverse global warming with an objective to achieve drawdown. And these solutions are from different sectors, but my focus again will be on land and food sector. But it would be nice to know that what is the share of greenhouse gas emissions coming from this sector, which is a significant amount. Nearly 1/4 of the total emissions are from food, agriculture, and land use, primarily from deforestation, methane emissions from rice, and there are other emissions associated with land and agriculture and food, the way conventionally we are operating. So we have a key question to answer, and that is how we can reduce the pressure on ecosystem and land while meeting the growing demand of food and fiber alongside addressing the climate change issues. Our analysis at Project Drawdown, which is based on extensive meta-analysis of peer-reviewed data, has shown that we have the answer for that question. What we have to do is protect our ecosystem in order to prevent any emissions associated with future deforestation and degradation. We also need to restore degraded land, as you have seen, heard here in our keynote presentation, that these restoration of degraded land will also provide an additional opportunity to grow biomass and food on the restored degraded land, which will in turn prevent any land conversion associated with that under the conventional case. Similarly, we also have to shift the agriculture practices from conventional to more regenerative so that we can avoid emissions associated there, as well as enable a system that sequesters carbon into soil and biomass, while without ignoring to address waste and diet, which contribute an important role in reducing food demand. So here is a snapshot of our results, the top 20 results under two scenarios, scenario 1 and scenario 2. Under scenario 1, we have tried to keep the adoption prognostication conservative, while in scenario 2, the trajectories for adoptions were optimized to achieve drawdown by 2050. The analysis is done for the time period 2020 to 2050, and in those 30 years time period, the ranking was given based on their climate impact. The amazing and interesting fact here is that land and food are top 10 out of the top 20 solutions. This is really exciting because most of the time, whenever we were asked to give solutions for climate change, primarily it was coming from energy and renewables. Surely we need them, but we also need land and food sector based solutions. And this finding will for sure, shift the thinking, our traditional thinking on climate actions, and will give more opportunities for funders and policy levels to look after these solutions as a way forward if we have to address the issues of climate change as a whole. And finally, in this slide, you see the potential of the drawdown land and food sector solutions in addressing the emissions coming from the agriculture, forest, and land use. Surely at 2020, the emissions are higher because we do not have many climate actions into place. But if we will have drawdown solutions between now and 2050, we will overcome these emissions. And in fact, we will be in a position to sequester more. And some of the key insights at the last that you might be wondering whether drawdown is possible. Yes, drawdown is very much possible. What we need is that we need political will and collaboration at all scales, because we do not have time and we really have to fix these issues as soon as possible. We also need a systemic approach because all of these climate solutions are interlinked, and as a system, we should be able to address them in an effective manner. These climate solutions, beside having climate impact, also have many co-benefits, whether it is ecosystem services, improved livelihood, income, women empowerment, and so on. And the financial analysis, what we have done, clearly shows that the savings are much higher than the cost. And lastly, we really cannot ignore the nature's carbon sink potential while reducing the emissions to a level of zero as possible. And finally, we strongly believe that for every problem, there's a solution. For every fear, there's a possibility. And each and every conflict can be resolved by collaborations, and hope that we all should work together to achieve drawdown, to have a regenerative future for us and for our coming generation. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Well, thank you so much, Mamta. It's so great to hear you say that drawdown is possible, because sometimes we need to really sort of find and dig in for that hope. With your extensive experience, where would you say we should focus our energy in scaling these solutions in the food and agriculture sector?
I think the four pathways we just mentioned about, but at Drawdown 2.0, our real question is that how we can achieve drawdown. The question is that we can achieve, but that's why, like in the earlier panel, people were giving innovations of financial incentives so that we have to really find out the ways or innovations to implement these solutions at the ground level. And I believe we have to address both ecosystems as well as how we can produce food and fiber more sustainably on our existing cropland and grassland without any further clearing of our primary land types.
So what does Project Drawdown need to have an even bigger impact?
Project Drawdown needs collaboration. We need synergies. We need, actions coming at all scales, because at global scale, it's good to present, okay, this is the overall picture and the hope is there. Now at Drawdown 2.0, we are moving from global level analysis to regional, national, and more local, so that we can find solutions that are customized to the local needs and should be in a position to implement that with the local bodies over there.
Well, thank you very much, Mamta Mehra, for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now let's listen to the next expert.
Meet Dan Miller, founder and CEO of farmers' crowd farming platform Steward, which supports regenerative farming practices. This captures carbon, improves soil health, water and air, and it increases access to fresh, healthy food.
Hi there, thank you for joining us today, and please share your presentation.
Absolutely. My name is Dan Miller. I'm the founder of Steward, which is an investment platform for regenerative agriculture. The idea of supporting regenerative farms is very important, but they often don't have the resources that they need. Steward began as I started to meet the new generation of regenerative farmers and realized that access to capital was an issue for all of them. And I think people realize that they need funding, but what are the mechanisms to get them funding? And so Steward was built as a platform to let individuals invest in these regenerative farms for as little as $100, really opening up a new source of capital for these farms that need it. Traditional funding in agriculture is driven by government policy. The US led the way, and most of that policy focused us on large conventional agriculture. So if you're not an industrial producer, if you're not growing large-scale commodities, you're often left out of the system. And that means that the farmers that are doing the important climate work, that are practicing regenerative agriculture, they don't have access to funds they need to grow. So while they can get their farms started, they can't get funding to buy land, equipment, irrigation, infrastructure. And so they get stuck operating on a small scale, unable to meet market demand, but also unable to get the resources they need to take care of the land. So what we do at Steward is bring on farmers from around the world, give them the tools they need to raise capital, provide funding as well, provide services to them, and let them focus on what they'd like to do, which is farming. The idea came to me, and my interest in regenerative agriculture came from my mother's family, which has been farming in the Chesapeake Bay for the past 100 years. This was one of the key watersheds in the United States. It's the largest estuary in the United States. And it was degraded by 99% over the past 50 years with overfishing and runoff and pollutants. And so one of the key ecological factors for that region was decimated in one generation from our current agricultural practices. And so that motivated me to find out who are the farmers, who are the watermen, who are the people providing alternative solutions, using their resources to do better, and how do we get those people the resources they need. And what began as starting with single farms, with urban farms in Detroit and forestry projects in Oregon, livestock farms in Louisiana, has now become a really global movement with farms that we're working with all around the world. And the challenges are the same. This is not limited by geography. Any regenerative farmer in the entire world, they all have trouble raising capital. They all have trouble getting funding. They're all limited with time and need more resources. And what we want to do is bring anybody who wants to be involved, anyone who wants to invest in these farms, anyone who wants to provide their expertise to these farms, to join the network, to join Steward, to become part of it, to connect with these farmers and put their resources. In the 1890s in the US, half of the population was connected to agriculture. Now it's 2% of the population. That was related to the mechanization of agriculture, and that means that most people were put off the land. And we need a movement to bring millions of people back to farming. And that's what it's going to take to really scale regenerative agriculture, to really bring regenerative agriculture to where it needs to be, and then provide the resources to the people who are doing it today.
Well, thank you. That's fantastic work you're doing, really. In the light of COVID, how is your work at Steward affected?
It's really accelerated. So most of the farms in our network, they've seen growth of 2-3 times for sales, mainly retail sales. So the direct-to-consumer market has exploded. That's far outpaced any losses from restaurant sales. So for us, this is actually the first time that I think consumers are really conscious about where should I source my food? How do I get the best product? So for the small sustainable farm, they're one of the only beneficiaries of this crisis.
So how can you build on this momentum? Because we are really facing and seeing the food vulnerability, and I asked Mr. Chow before, the food supply chains, that we need to have food production closer to our homes, sometimes in some countries when it's possible to feed us in better ways. So how could you build on this momentum?
It's just bringing on more resources. We've been building tools to help farmers sell direct to customers. That helps them get more revenue and meet the demand that they're seeing. We brought on more funding to scale the number of farmers we're supporting. So we receive applications every minute. I mean, it's across the world, from Kenya to Mexico to the United States. It's not limited by any region. And any farmer who's regenerative that wants to do better, that wants resources, we try to support them. And that's our mission. That's our passion.
Well, it's a wonderful passion. And I hope you get swamped by being on this segment. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And now let's get our daily dose of Juice Media.
Hello, I'm from the Australian Government. We know you want us to transition to renewables ASAP so you can get on with your favourite activity, continuing human life on this planet. Well, good news. There's only one barrier left between you and a clean energy future. It's not technological, it's not economic. Nope, it's us. That's right. After ditching the carbon price, dumping this, refusing this, and trying to kill these, we're proud to bring you NEG, the Negligible Energy Guarantee, because it's such a watered-down weak policy that it's literally worse than doing nothing at all, which is precisely why our BFFs love it so much. And keeping them and this bunch of nutjobs happy is pretty much our official energy policy. I mean, why should we encourage renewables? We should let the market decide how we get our energy. And nothing says free market like propping up a dying industry with your tax dollars, or trying to force this ancient relic to stay open when even its owners are saying coal is dead. Sadly, not everyone shares our dream of delaying the transition to clean energy. Like those smug eco-hipsters in South Australia who went and reached their 50% renewable target a decade early and are on track to hit this one by 2025. Just because they invested in shit like the world's biggest lithium-ion battery, built by combining two resources no longer found in Canberra, leadership and brains. It's only been running for a few months and is already making us look like heads. Whatever. There's one renewable resource we do believe investing in. Bullshit. Bullshit is what fuels our daily fear-mongering about blackouts and higher prices, when in fact renewables are responding to peak demand and reducing electricity bills. Which is why, instead of waiting for us, Aussies are taking matters into their own hands to get this done. And it's why the market invested $9 billion in 2017 alone into solar farms, solar trains, solar whatever that is. Heck, even these are investing in solar. And why not? With the prospect of new jobs, cheaper bills, and avoiding epic climate change fail, what kind of energy Neanderthal would want to stand in the way of the renewables boom that's coming? Well, us. Australian government. We've stopped the boats. Now it's time to stop the sun. Authorised by the Department for Transitioning to the Dark Ages.
Thank you very much, Juice Media. As always, it brings a smile, but always something else to our hearts, right, when you look at it. Well, let's move to our studio in Washington, D.C. Hello there, Shutta. How are you today?
Hi there. Good afternoon from Washington, D.C. Fabulous to see you as always.
Great. Likewise, Shutta. So what guests do you have lined up for us today?
We're really quite thrilled to have some top experts in food and agriculture in studio and joining us via Zoom. We have Dr. Taylor Wallace. He is a food scientist. We have Jack Bobo, a food futurist. That'll be an exciting panel discussion of them together, followed by a second panel with Melinda Balil at the Bill and Gates Foundation and Dan Rieto at the Breakthrough Institute. So without further ado, let's meet Taylor Wallace and Jack Bobo.
Meet Jack Bobo, previously a senior advisor for global food policy at the U.S. Department of State. He is now the CEO of Futurity, a food foresight company that explores the future of food and consumer trends. This is Dr. Taylor Wallace, Principal and CEO of the Think Healthy Group, an organization that seeks to create a healthier generation of consumers through spreading credible research in the fields of nutrition and food science.
Jack and Taylor, I'm thrilled to have you both joining us here today. So let's start with you, Jack. If this wasn't the time of Corona, we would all be together in studio, but we appreciate you accommodating this virtual conference that we had planned well in advance of Corona, in fact. Jack, let's talk a little bit about human behavior. That's something that you and I are both really fascinated by. And generally, fear around food exists, but it's been heightened in this time of Corona. What can you tell us about human behavior, how people perceive food and food risk, not just now in this unique time that we're all experiencing, but also as the planet warms? Is that going to increase perception of risk and then ultimately choices in the foods people make?
Yeah, thanks. And I'm really excited to be here as well. It's wonderful to join you guys. I wish I could be there in the studio. When we think about food and how people perceive it and food fear, it's interesting because 100 years ago, our food was not safe and people had real reason to be concerned about their food and food safety. But as our food has become safer and safer, we've actually worry about smaller and smaller risks. And that's simply human behavior. But the choices that we make about the food we eat will have huge impacts, not just on our personal health, but as you suggested, on the health of the planet.
That's right. And so generally speaking, do we really need to be concerned about the food supply right now in this unique time, but also increasingly as the planet warms? I'm going to turn to you, Taylor, and ask you this. You're an expert in this area. What is it about the food supply that is making people so worried right now? Should they be worried? And we need to think really about what does this mean for us going forward? We've learned a lot in terms of access to food, availability of food. How are we going to feed 9.8 billion people as the planet warms?
Well, and I think this whole COVID-19 situation has really opened people's eyes. I mean, if you think about the food supply, it's not just about what's happening in the developed world. We see a lot of panic purchasing where, I went to the grocery store yesterday and it's impossible to find flour, sugar, staple commodities. What happens in developing countries when panic purchasing occurs is that bulk purchasers, like lower income countries or relief groups, they get very nervous that in June, July, August, they're not going to have the critical supplies they need. So they begin bulk purchasing. And that doesn't necessarily hurt the developed world as much as it hurts the developing world, because prices then skyrocket and, food supply chains begin to shut down. And I think we're starting to see that across several, agricultural commodities.
Right. So that really sort of begins to explain some of the behavior that we're seeing in this time. And it also really makes us think about what is it going to be like as potentially we need to increase food production, right? To be able to feed the increasing number of people we have on the planet. Let me turn to you, Jack. You talk a lot about how we need to increase the amount of food we produce to nutritiously and sustainably feed the increasing number of people. Can we get into a little bit about why these next 30 years, as you say, is going to be the most significant ever in the history of human beings?
Yeah, well, the challenge is pretty dramatic. In the next 30 to 40 years, we need to produce almost as much food as was produced in the last 10,000 years of human history. So let me repeat that. We have to produce as much food in the next 30 or 40 years as was produced in the last 10,000 years of human history. That is a huge challenge. Now, part of that is because population is increasing, but also part of it is because incomes are increasing. So people are able to buy more protein and things like that. So we have this enormous challenge in front of us. But what's interesting is that if we look beyond 2050, population begins to level off very dramatically. And so every day between now and 2050, it gets harder to feed the world. Every day after 2050, it will get easier to feed the world. And so that's the opportunity that we have. So I like to say that the next 30 years are not just the most important 30 years there have ever been in the history of agriculture, and they're the most important 30 years there will ever be in the history of agriculture. So if we can get to 2050 without cutting down our forests and without draining our rivers, our lakes, and our aquifers, we could be good forever.
Okay, well, that is positive. That's good to hear. One, do you agree with that, Taylor? And two, based on the trends Jack just outlined, we're talking about increasing population, increasing income, and this warming trend. The combination of all of that, what do we need to think about in addition to increased production? How do these trends impact the food supply in a way that could be more difficult to nutritiously feed people on the planet? I'm talking about certain crops that might have less yield, and just switching over from maybe animal-based to plant-based. Is that something we need to think about in terms of realistically, nutritiously, sustainably feeding 9.8 billion by 2050?
Well, it's definitely something we have to think about. I mean, the growing population, everybody has a certain nutritional need. Now, I've expressed a lot of concern, particularly towards the move towards a more plant-based society. I think there's some repercussions of that. And I think you see that particularly, again, in developing countries. We all have a protein requirement. Look, I'm a nutrition scientist. I wrote one of the, leading papers on fruit and vegetable intake. There's no question that consuming more fruits and vegetables is healthy for you. But here's the caveat. The effects really max out at like 5 to 6 servings a day, at least with the current science that we have now. And so the evidence around vegan, vegetarian isn't really there. And if you look, we're doing a study in Guatemala currently where we're looking at 1,200 fairly severely malnourished children. And animal agriculture interventions are what work. You do a plant-based intervention with those kids, it doesn't work. And yes, there are critical times in the lifespan where animal agriculture is probably more important, as you age, early childhood when cognition and brain development is important. But everybody has a certain nutritional requirement, and certain nutrients are found in animal-derived foods, and certain nutrients are found in plant-derived foods. We can go plant-based. People can be vegetarian and vegan, but you really, really have to know how to supplement, and not a lot of people do that appropriately.
Sure.
They think they do.
Yeah. And no, thank you for that information, because I think the solution that has been proposed and put forward of everybody switching to plant-based diet, while it's a action that can be taken, it's really important to also recognize the trade-offs there. So we need to really think about that.
Well, and I'll say, I think the one really good thing about this debate, the whole plant-based debate has really rallied animal agriculture to invest in technology. If you look at the beef industry, for instance, they're developing new feed technologies where you can give cattle, certain feeds that will reduce methane gas production right now by about 25%. Right now it's commercially a little bit expensive, but they're getting there. And I think that's really incentivizing people to do so. And I think that's exactly where we need to go.
Because as we were talking about before the top of the show, is that agricultural industry is not just disappearing. It's not going anywhere.
Right. People like me don't want to give up ice cream.
Right.
And if technology can help us overcome that, I think that's a great thing.
Sure. So we're talking about technology, and let's bring in Jack again to talk a little bit about some of the public reaction and pushback we've gotten to technology that has a lot of promise, potentially, genetically modified organisms, and especially as it relates to food and agriculture. I'd love to chat to you a little bit, Jack, about the different range of opinions that exist in terms of adoption and commercial viability of these types of technologies. We have over 130 countries that are tuning in right now. And we know that there's different attitudes generally across the board in terms of whether or not this is something that can actually make it to the finally being adopted by the end consumer. Talk to us a little bit about that spectrum of adoption, acceptability. Why is there pushback? And ultimately, how do we see some of these technologies make it to the market?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for that question. So when I think about things like genetically modified organisms and how people think about it, a lot of it has to do with the difference between how we think about sustainability. On one hand, most consumers, when they think about sustainability, they think about local sustainability. So if I can reduce the impact of agriculture on a farm, that seems like a wonderful thing. On the other hand, there's this concept of global sustainability. So the more intensive agriculture is in one place, the less intensive agriculture needs to be in another place. And so just to give an example of that, in Europe, they've generally avoided GMOs, and that's a choice that they have. But then there are consequences because of that choice. And so because of that, Europe has focused on smaller farms, fewer inputs, less intensive agriculture. But in turn, they have to import 70% of their animal feed needs. And the country that sends the most food to Europe is Brazil. So in many ways, Europe has exported its environmental footprint for agriculture to arguably the most biodiverse country on the planet. So it's not about good and bad and right and wrong. It's about choices and consequences. And now on Earth Day, it's the most important time to be thinking about that. So it's important to have local sustainability. Organic agriculture can deliver that, but it's also important to have global sustainability, and sometimes intensive agriculture can deliver that. So the diversity of our food system is the strength of our food system. So people should feel confident about these different choices because the scientists and the regulators that are looking out for it, they care about the future of our planet as well.
Thank you for that. It's the diversity of our food system, and it's also the diversity of solutions and tools that we have in our toolkit to address these really massive challenges ahead of us. So let's talk about a few other solutions and options. We hear a lot about organic and natural, right? And we have this public perception that that's better for you. It's more nutritious for you. As a nutrition and food scientist, can we debunk some of these myths? Is it actually better, especially in this time where maybe not all the selections are available? How do you speak to families and those who are listening that it's okay that you might not have gotten access to that organic vegetable over that non-organic vegetable, for example?
Right. So first, I want to make the point that natural doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you. Arsenic is natural, but we don't want you consuming a lot of arsenic.
Chemicals are natural,
Yeah,
technically.
chemicals are very natural. And so, you know, if you look at something like potatoes, they contain what's called glycoalkaloids, which can be neurotoxins in large quantities. So, you know, natural doesn't always necessarily mean better for you. When it comes to organic, I couldn't agree with Jack more. I mean, you know, these next 30 years are going to be critical. I feel like that, I hope Jack is right, that it levels off by 2050, that the population levels off. How are we going to get there? GMOs. I mean, you're looking at climate change happening right now, droughts in sub-Saharan Africa that are making agriculture in certain areas of the world impossible. So what do we need to do? One, we need to invest in GMO technology because there's not a single scientific study that's credible that has shown that it's unsafe. And in fact, we've been consuming GMOs in the US for, 30, 40 years at this point. So, when we think about it, water resources, if you go to a conventional farm, it's 10 times more productive than an organic farm. And there's no nutritional difference between organic and conventional produce.
Wow, that might actually be news to some people that are listening in. And so that's important to remember. It's about nutrition ultimately. And think twice or think deeply about the labels surrounding those products.
Well, and let me make one point because, a lot of people jump straight to the pesticide issue when you talk about conventional agriculture versus organic. One, there are approved pesticides that can be used on organic produce as well. They can be, just toxic. And, on the other side, organic foods, they don't really have the nutritional component that, or they have just as much of a nutritional component. They're the same as conventional.
Right. Okay. Well, viewers, you heard that here, and we have scientists and futurists that are really making their case. So, Jack, do you have any thoughts on what Taylor just said there? Is there anything you would like to echo? And generally, as we've been talking this whole week, this is Earth Day week. And it's the 50th anniversary. So it really gives us a moment to pause and think about how far we've come and what we're hoping to see the future look like, this carbon-free future. In regards to the food supply chain, what does this carbon-free future look like for you and for the food systems that we interact with more closely than really any other system?
Yeah, so when I think about the future, I often read reports from the World Wildlife Fund and conservation organizations, World Resource Institute, and they're talking about the impact of agriculture on the planet in terms of deforestation and climate change and all of those things. And all of those impacts are true. They're absolutely true. Agriculture is one of the largest drivers of deforestation, 80% of it. But it's also important for us to think about how far we've come. So instead of using today as our baseline, as we look back over the history of the Earth Day, we should go back and see how far we've come. So if you look at the difference between 1980 and 2011 in terms of the resources necessary to produce a bushel of corn in the United States, just as an example, we're producing 35% fewer greenhouse gases, we use 50% less water, and there's 60% less erosion on the land in order to do that. And so by every single measure, agriculture today is wildly better than it was in the past. So we've made enormous strides. Now, the point, though, is not that there are no problems. It's that things are not bad and getting worse. Things are good and getting better, but not fast enough. And that's critical because if things are bad and getting worse, that means farmers are the problem to be solved. If things are good and getting better, that means farmers are the solution to our problem. And so how we talk about this problem will determine whether or not every farmer in the world is working with us or they're the enemy that we're working against. And so how we frame this conversation will ultimately determine whether or not we're all working together or we're working against each other.
Let's pick up on that point. Taylor, you're from Kentucky. That's quite a farming state here in the United States.
I'm from a farm in Kentucky.
You're from a farm in Kentucky. So we don't have a farmer on this particular segment, but talk to us a little bit about what the farmers would be thinking and saying.
Well, I think what Jack brought up is really important. you have to work with farmers and you have to work with the food industry. Like, look, these guys know supply chains. And so, if you want to make a change, you can't fight them. You have to collaborate with them because they're the ones that actually can touch the consumer and can actually make the difference in supply chains, whether it be in a developing country or whether it be here in the United States. Technology only goes so far if people don't adopt it. So, I think we need to be addressing their needs. They're obviously feeding all of us, so they're an important part of society. I think Jack makes a very valid point. I want to go back for a minute because I didn't get my complete point through on pesticides. When it comes to pesticides, I wanted to make the point, and this actually, your whole farm scenario kind of brought this back to me. When I was out visiting the canola fields in Canada, they have those huge spray trucks that spray all the chemicals on plants.
Right.
One of the farmers brought out a little mason jar that was about a third full of Roundup. And he's like, this is how much we put on a football-sized field of canola.
Roundup, the Monsanto Roundup.
The Monsanto Roundup, the evil glyphosate, they're putting, a third of a mason jar on a whole football field and increasing production, right? So production is 10 times more than what it would be with an organic farm because of that glyphosate. And if you look from a nutritional perspective, sure, I can dose a rat up with any type of chemical and it'll end up and be some type of carcinogen. But at parts per trillion that we find on conventional produce, there's no research to show that it's harmful to anybody.
Well, we know that humans want zero risk. There's very little tolerance for risk. And we don't live in any sort of system where we can promise human beings zero risk, whether we're talking about catching disease or some sort of toxin in the food that they eat, there's always going to be some risk.
Well, and I think that this is a real eye-opening situation with COVID-19 because prior to current day, we've been kind of natural. Now we're all stocking up on processed foods because those are what are safe. And food additives and pesticides, things like that are added for a reason. And so, they're really kind of sustaining us right now. So I think this should be an eye-opening moment for all of us to really, say, hey, maybe this isn't so bad.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Jack for his thoughts on exactly what this looks like in terms of how far we've come and how the food supply system is really never been safer. But before we do that, let's go to Stockholm. We have a question from one of our viewers that are tuning in somewhere else in the world. Nick, if you could please direct that question for us.
Yeah, thanks very much, Veta. There's a lot of people in Europe steaming over some of the comments here about GMOs and pesticides, but we'll leave those out of it right now because there's just too many and I'd let people down. So we've talked about increasing food production. This is a question from somebody called Bob. Increasing food production, but we had the Executive Secretary of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification on the show at the beginning, saying that something like the size of South America is now degraded, damaged, infertile. Of course, you have the same problem sometimes in the US with the famous Dust Bowls in the 20s or 30s. The question here is shouldn't we be investing more in restoring degraded land? And a supplementary question is, how much does foreign aid and foreign aid financial incentives drive destructive agriculture? So they're kind of both linked, if you've got that question. Do we restore degraded land? Does that get us out of the problem? Plus, what do overseas development foreign aid practices do in terms of sustainable agriculture? Either of you guys.
Yeah, perhaps I could get started on that question. It's a really good question. And one of the challenges we have is that in order to feed a growing planet, we need to do it on the same amount of land or less. And so if we were producing food today the way it was produced in 1980, there would be no forest left on the planet. And so by necessity, agriculture must become more intensive every single year, or it becomes more expansive. So restoring degraded lands is critically important, and we absolutely should be doing that, and we are doing that. There are a lot of programs that are intended to increase forest cover and to expand that, but we need to produce that we need to double the food supply in the next 30 years, and it must be on the same land. And if you do that, by default, it is more intensive. When it comes to development programs, well, if you're going to be investing in improving agriculture in other places, again, that's going to lead to more intensive agriculture, and there are going to be trade-offs. The Green Revolution saved 1 billion lives, but it also contributed to use of groundwater and other things. But saving 1 billion lives is in the plus column, and now we absolutely need to address the negative consequences of those decisions.
Thank you for that, Jack. Taylor, we always wish we have so much more time to have these conversations, especially because we definitely touch upon some controversial topics, but please, your final thoughts as we close out this segment.
Well, right as we got people riled up about GMOs, I know Europeans always get riled up about the whole GMO issue, we can GMO develop crops that have root systems that go deeper, that put nitrogen back into the soil, that put carbon back into the soil. Regenerative agriculture, GMO, again, it's going to be your answer.
So on that note, our next panel is going to be getting into some of these innovations in plant breeding. So that's a great segue. Thank you so much for being here in person in our Washington, D.C. studio. Jack, hope to see you in person soon once we're through COVID-19. Thank you again for your contribution. It's always a pleasure to talk to you both.
Thank you.
So we'll move next to our segment with Melinda and Dan. Let's meet them here.
Meet Dan Reito. As Associate Director of the Breakthrough Institute's Food and Agriculture Program, he studies how to decarbonize agriculture through technical innovation and public policy making. This is Melinda Belisle. As a fellow in the Global Growth and Opportunity Program at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Melinda focuses on the role of technology in helping small-scale producers adapt to climate change.
Hi, Melinda and Dan. Thank you both so much for joining me today.
Hi, good morning, Shetta. It's really good to see you.
Thanks for having us, Shetta.
And you're both on the west coast of the United States, so it's super early for you. So we appreciate that even more. That's kind of one of the issues that happens when you're trying to do a global conference, finding that sweet spot of time to get everybody awake and not too bleary-eyed. So thank you for both being here and contributing your expertise. We just heard from Jack and Taylor talking about agriculture, food, the future, and innovations. I'd love to get your thoughts on, as we think about mitigating against climate change and adapting, what are some of the innovations that we can begin to actually realize? Are these just a pipeline dream, or are they really going to be feasible anytime soon to be able to help us address the warming planet? Really, I'm talking about plant breeding, but we'll go into animal agriculture after that. Let's start with you, Dan.
Well, I think first I'd like to just recognize where our food comes from. This morning, for instance, I had a piece of toast and peanut butter for breakfast, as I'm sure many other people did as well. And the wheat for the toast and, of course, the peanuts, much of them were bred by public plant breeders at universities, at federal government research agencies. And these plant breeders have been key both to maintaining the productivity of wheat as pests change, as weather and climate changes. That will continue to be the case, I think, for a very long time. And these plant breeders are essential too for helping mitigate the impacts of climate change and to reduce agriculture's contributions. I see a couple different ways that plant breeders can help with this. One important way is by developing crops that sequester or store more of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and the soils. Researchers around the world are already working on this and think that they might be able to increase the amount of carbon that's stored as much as 50%, which would be a real game changer. And the other key opportunity I see is, as Jack Bobo was saying earlier, is to develop crops that are more productive, that produce more food on less land, helping us stop the spread and the conversion of forests and grasslands into agricultural land.
That's great. Thank you for that. Melinda, let's turn to you. What are some of your thoughts on the future of innovation and plant breeding in particular?
Well, I mean, I think we have really focused on mitigating the effects of climate change, but we also have to realize that farmers are on the front lines, being that they interact so heavily with the environment. And so we also have to think about helping them adapt to climate change, because they're some of the first people that are going to feel the negative effects. So with regards to plant breeding, that means plants that are more drought tolerant, they're more resilient. Maybe they are able to deal with more heat stress or periods of periodic flooding. So these are all things that plant breeders can start breeding for today, so that when we start to see an increased prevalence of these conditions going forward, that those seeds are available. And then I think another thing that we need to think about is not just the innovations that are being developed now, but the fact that innovation is contextualized. So for instance, in the US, a new maize variety will turn over in a farmer's field every 4 years or so. But in countries in sub-Saharan Africa and East Asia, a farmer might be using the same seed for 15 or 20 years. And so there are innovations that exist today in plants that have been bred already that you can then just hand over to that farmer. So it's already there, but it's not being used in a context in which it could be used to really help that farmer adapt. And then if we move one stage beyond plant breeding, there's also a lot of innovative tools that exist now within our systems that we're using in the US. For instance, irrigation might be one example of that. Where we've been using irrigation in the US for a really long time. But again, in places in sub-Saharan Africa, more than 90% of their agriculture is rain-fed. So something as simple as taking an innovation that's existed for a long time and being able to give it to people that can use that innovation now to really help them adapt to climate change and help make their agriculture systems more productive.
It is so thrilling to hear about these innovations. And we're talking not just about plant breeding, but also let's talk about livestock and animal agriculture. We heard from Gillian Seaman on Monday. She is the Director of Food and Agriculture for Earth Day Network. And she discussed how animal agriculture contributes to it's the second largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. And so that is significant. And there's potentially a lot of room there to reform and to innovate. So let's talk a little bit about that. Dan, why don't we go over to you?
As you were saying, animal agriculture is by far the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector, and globally is one of the major sources of emissions, perhaps as much as 15% or so of global emissions. So it certainly is key to reduce the carbon footprint of livestock and of animal agriculture. Many, I think, efforts that we've seen in the past have focused on shifting diets and trying to promote vegetarianism and otherwise reduce meat consumption. And I think these are really important, but we've also seen the limitations of those approaches. Despite decades of efforts, meat consumption keeps rising in the high-income countries where groups are promoting vegetarianism and other diets the most. And globally, we still have hundreds of millions of people, if not billions, who are directly reliant on animal agriculture for their daily livelihoods and their income, nutrition, and food security. All of the major assessments I've seen, including last year's Eat Lancet report, find that in many low-income countries, people need to eat more meat, they need more protein, not less. So we need to find ways to really continue to produce meat and other animal products, but with a smaller footprint. And I think that there are many really exciting innovations that already exist and that are really coming down the pipeline. So one that I am particularly excited about is the development of plant-based and cell-based, also called lab-grown meat alternatives that are very similar, that resemble the taste, texture, and other characteristics of current meat products, but have a much smaller environmental footprint. But those probably will not be scalable throughout the world, especially in lower income environments. So in places such as in sub-Saharan Africa and much of Latin America, even East Asia, there need to be efforts to continue to help small-scale livestock producers be more productive, to produce more meat and milk with the resources and animals that they already have. Just to highlight the importance of this and the opportunity, the typical beef producer in Africa produces about 3 times more greenhouse gas emissions per kilogram or pound of meat than a producer in North America or Europe. So that's both a problem as well as a huge opportunity. We can use existing information and tools in veterinary medicine, information about grazing, livestock breeding, to really close that gap between regions and help produce both more food with a smaller impact.
So the theme really has been that animal agriculture isn't necessarily going away. So how do we make it more efficient? And then ultimately, where does cultured meat fit into all of this? You touched upon that. And if we have time, I'd love to come back to that. But we have viewers really engaged with this panel all around the world. So let's go over to Nick and take a question from him.
Well, that's amazing. I didn't realize I was going to actually get to ask any questions, but here we go. Thanks very much indeed. I think there's a big question coming out in this entire discussion, Shweta, between some of the discussions happening here in the USA and some of the response of probably quite a lot of Europeans on this side of the pond. They're wondering whether there's an agricultural system in the United States or a philosophy that's very different to what people have in Europe, which isn't a direct question maybe to you what you're doing. But I wondered if you could touch on that, because the viewers are quite clear, right, from this side probably, very upset about the comments about GMOs. Somebody mentions that the first Earth Day was to do with Silent Spring and Rachel Carson's book with DDT, that other pesticides that were mentioned on the program were basically killing bees or clearing bees out of the system in Europe and other places. Somebody said, who's paying these mercenaries? So we'll leave it there. But, and I know that doesn't directly discuss the issue of creating protein, meat-like proteins. But do you think are different philosophies in the world about where we need to go?
So I will turn to Melinda briefly after just a few brief remarks here. There is different tolerance of risk, and there is different cross-cultural variances. And so we need to remember that and keep that in mind. It does vary significantly from the US and around the world. Mm-hmm. And that being said, the real takeaway message is that we need to have all the tools in our toolkit. We don't have the luxury of dismissing innovations because of that sort of resistance or lack of tolerance for certain advances, because we face a really huge challenge collectively, which is the planet warming and increasing number of people to feed nutritiously by 2050, and we have to increase food production by 70%. And so to not keep all the tools in our toolkit would be a disservice to the number of people that will benefit potentially from various options. It's not just GMOs for the world. We're talking about all of these different innovations with that purpose behind it, is what are the potential options, what makes sense, what combinations of options make sense, which is why it's so fantastic to have a range of speakers, not just those on one side of the debate or the other, but to really get a full view of what the landscape looks like in terms of food innovation. So with that, Melinda, I didn't want to just
clearing it all up, Shweta. Yeah, thanks for clearing it up. Yeah.
Yes. Sure, no worries, Nick. So let's go to Melinda. And Melinda, let's talk a little bit about if any reactions to that comment. You work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which obviously has people on the ground all over the world and really has the spectrum from rich to poor. So what are kind of the thoughts from your vantage point? And then also let's talk about conventional agriculture versus more smaller, local, sustainable or perceived sustainable agricultural systems. Your thoughts, please.
I mean, so I would say yes, there's definitely a different ethos in the US from the EU. And I think sometimes it's shocking when we interact with each other. I think of the US sometimes as really the breadbasket of the world. Like we export so much food globally. And in Europe, Europe does import a lot of its food, and a lot of the agriculture there is also subsidized. And so seeing very adorable bucolic farms with a few cows kind of, milling around, a lot of that is also subsidized by the EU government mechanism. So the government is paying farmers to create this more idyllic setting that is not necessarily an intensive agricultural setting that's made to maximize yield. So if we can talk a little bit about the trade-offs there, and I think Jack touched on that a little bit. So when you think of sort of a smaller integrated farm that has that's growing a lot of different types of fruit and vegetables, there are some definite positives and benefits to that. So the farmer can maybe follow more agroecological approaches. They can integrate the natural environment into part of their farming system. So all of that is really excellent. But then there's some trade-offs there. So the trade-offs might be that they have to cut down trees and use a little bit more land to do that. It might also mean that they're not able to feed as many people. And so it depends on what your population looks like. Are you able to import food from elsewhere? Do you have enough money to pay for that system? And so in that European setting, that potentially makes sense and it's a good way to do it. But in other settings, for instance, thinking of like New York City, you have a lot of people living there. They all need to be fed. How do you get them enough food? So if you think of a system like that would be helpful for that kind of setting, you might want to shift to a more resource intensive type of agriculture system where you're making more food per acre. You're cutting down less land or less trees that you need to cut down. And you're just producing more food that you can then pass on to those people that really need it. And you get some benefits there as well. So I think a globally functional agricultural system will have both types and be able to leverage the benefits of both types of agriculture and sort of spread the risks around. So I'd say that's how I would answer that. And then I also want to jump back to that livestock question that you were talking about with Dan. We can also think of, so there are some new tools in livestock breeding and livestock production that could help to make livestock more productive. And so what you really want to have is less cows, but more productive cows. So if you can have fewer cattle, then you reduce your emissions. But then, as Dan was saying, in some places in Africa, for instance, you have cows that are significantly less productive. So some new tools that we haven't discussed yet, for instance, are gene editing. So where you can take naturally occurring variants. So you're not, taking, a mouse gene and putting it into a cow. You're taking a cow gene and you're putting it into another cow. So no trans species changes. But what you can do here is you can take, let's say, a gene for heat stress and put it into a really productive cow. If you try to take a Holstein cattle, which is the ones that produce a lot of dairy, and put them in Africa, they will die immediately. So they're not able to tolerate the heat, they're not adapted to the pests and diseases, but they are extremely productive. So can you take some of those genes that confer heat tolerance in African breeds and put them into a highly productive Holstein cattle? Or you can do the vice versa, take a productivity gene from Holstein and put it into a less productive types of cattle. So that's some of the ways we can use technology that are maybe less offensive to people than the traditional GMO techniques to help advance the discussion here.
Well, thank you for sharing that and for really adding some reality to what the conventional versus these new models of agriculture do and can look like going forward. And this is what we need to keep in mind, is that this is a massive challenge and there's a lot of smart people and efforts underway that are really trying to address them. So where can we really turn our attention? Because we do need to prioritize resources. And Dan, what would you say? Where would you inject more time, money, people, resources into seeing some of these challenges really for us to make some headway and really overcome some of these challenges?
I think the most important thing to keep in mind is both what causes seem to be most effective, which ones have most evidence that they can help improve food security, which remains a huge challenge for hundreds of millions of people globally, as well as help reduce emissions and help farmers adapt to changing climate and increasing weather extremes and natural disasters that they're facing. And also, I think we really need to keep in mind which causes are most neglected right now. Many great causes do have sufficient funding, and yet many do not. And I think the number one cause that I see that's both really high impact and that's often neglected is what Melinda was talking about increasing the productivity of livestock, especially in Africa, where many companies do not see much reason to get involved and develop products or to partner with researchers and other groups on the ground. I think that there are both international agricultural research nonprofits, such as the International Livestock Institute, as well as tons of national government research labs on the ground in different countries, which are doing really important work to help those farmers feed themselves, their families, their countries. And I think those organizations and efforts can really use global support.
Thank you. We'll turn to Melinda for her final thoughts on really how to get multi-stakeholder collaboration towards addressing some of these challenges. How do we get private sector, academia? How do we really promote that level of collaboration that's going to be so necessary?
I mean, I think I would like to harken back to what Jack Thobo was also saying earlier. I do think a lot of this is already happening. I think in some cases, there's this perception that things are getting worse, that people aren't moving forward and moving ahead. And I just don't really think that is the case. I think, the private sector is being leveraged, is moving into the space. Organizations like my own is definitely thinking about how we can connect with the private sector to help drive some of these issues forward. And also governments are very much involved. They want to see their local agricultural sectors do really well. So I think overall the system is functioning fairly well. And I think especially now with the COVID-19 pandemic situation, we can see how that system continues to function and move forward, even with some really pressing challenges. So I'm fairly hopeful, and I do think that things are generally working well, and most of us are well fed, and we have healthy, nutritious, and safe food, and that is increasingly the case for more and more people on this planet.
Well, thank you so much for that. That's a great way to leave our viewers and let's thank Dan and Melinda for joining in on this conversation, what tended to be a little controversial between the United States and Europe, but if we had an answer, then we wouldn't be having these discussions. So let's keep all the solutions on the table, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the rest of the programming has to offer from Stockholm. Back to you, Katarina. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Jutta. It really shows that food and agriculture really evokes a lot of feelings. And it's important to point out that there are many expert views on this topic, not to say the least about GMO, pesticides, and plant-based diets. And these were a few of the voices, international voices that are around. So let's just keep on talking about these subjects and feed in your thoughts, and I'm sure some of the Jutta's experts can also talk to the viewers on the app. So keep on working with this, keep on talking about it. We move on now to listen to another keynote presentation, and it's from Avit Bomik.
This is Avit Bomik. As the lead modeler for the Exponential Roadmap initiative, Avit's current work concerns social tipping points, how societies can swiftly transform to half emissions by 2030, and how to act to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Hi Avit, how are you today?
I'm doing good, how are you?
Great. So please share your thoughts and your insights with us.
Thanks, Katharina. Thanks for having me. And I can't emphasize that enough, that particularly in this turbulent time of the pandemic, that the urgency of transforming food sector is higher than ever before. And I'm here to share with you some of the work that the Exponential Roadmap team and I have been doing on this topic. But before I get to the bottom of this problem, I would like to just remind everyone of the privilege that we had during the last 10,000 years, where the Mother Nature supported the whole humanity to be where we are at now. So the entire human development wasn't have been possible if this stable period of 10,000 years weren't there. Particularly the food system, which is not basically a biological and physical essential to survive, for the humanities to survive, but also the whole human development and the whole planetary system is kind of built around that. So it's kind of an eye-opening if you think about it, because that wouldn't have been possible before when we went through several ice ages and the temperature was so fluctuating. But this 10,000 years, this Goldilocks equilibrium period of Holocene, where the temperature fluctuation was only between plus minus 1 degree Celsius, actually supported us to build this entire food system that we are taking benefit from. But yet, the last 300 years changed everything. When we learned how to convert one form of energy into another, the Industrial Revolution, and that spread all over the world, particularly the food production. If you think about the massive industrialization of food production that has taken place, the massive industrial meat production that has been happening, and all the things around the massive industrialization left a massive human footprint all over the world. And now I'm talking about today, we are emitting 5.6 billion tons of nitrous oxide and methane just from our food choices, the dietary pattern we have adopted, and the food we are wasting. And there is a huge paradox here if you think about it. In the Western industrialized countries where we are on an unsustainable way, we are shifting more and more to a meat-based diet, whereas there are countries like Indonesia, India, and Bangladesh, where I'm from, are suffering from massive burden of malnutrition. So if you want to solve this dilemma of taking those countries out, 1 billion people out of malnutrition burden, but at the same time, continue following this meat-based, unsustainable way, it would be likely that by 2050, we will end up with doubling this greenhouse gas emission from the food sector. And not only that, the food that we are consuming, the production of it, the agricultural system, is actually adding up another 7 billion tons of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere every year. So food and agriculture together is responsible for 12.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gas emission every year. And this can't continue. We have to transform that. And that's what Exponential Roadmap is all about. We are trying to scale up the solutions to bring humanity to a sustainable path, to a path that will take us to 1.5 degrees Celsius, a path that shows how to halve global greenhouse gas emissions no later than 2030. But you are probably wondering that how on earth would it be possible where our food choices and dietary pattern are so unsustainable and we have to get rid of this massive malnutrition burden to draw down this emission and halve emission from the food consumption sector? Well, it isn't. And the good news is we don't have to. So if you think about it, we are currently emitting 5.6 billion tons of greenhouse gases, and that will likely end up with 9.8 billion tons by 2050. But what we have to do, actually, just to draw it down to 5 billion tons of greenhouse gases per year, which is the planetary boundary for food, which is the boundary within which the humanity can operate safely. It doesn't look like much if you think about it, but if you look at the actual figure that we are on an unsustainable path and we need to get rid of this malnutrition burden, actually by 2030 is not just the reduction from 5.6 billion tons to 5.3 billion tons, it's actually a reduction from 6.8 billion tons to 5.3 billion tons. And that's a tremendous achievement. And we can achieve that by adopting healthy, sustainable diet that is plant-rich. If 70% of the global population adopt this diet, we will manage to achieve that. And that has to be coupled up with 50% reduction of food loss and food waste. And by adopting those, the healthy and sustainable diet and reducing food waste, actually will come up with several co-benefits and the impact we will see in the agricultural sector. Because when you decide to cut off your meat consumption and you adopt sustainable agricultural practices, actually that will avoid a lot of forest from deforestation, from cutting down. And that has to be coupled up with sustainable grazing, with improvement of the rice cultivation and the avoided peatland impacts. And if we manage to do that, we can actually exponentially draw down the emission from the agricultural sector, this 7 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gases, to 50% by 2030, and we can follow a sustainable path. But that's not what makes the food sector the dark horse here. What actually we often don't realize is the tremendous power of the food sector to sequester greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. So I was talking about the co-benefits. So if we shift to a sustainable diet and reduce our food waste and adopt sustainable agriculture, that will actually open up a massive amount of land that can be reforested and restored. And if you follow all these practices and sustainable practices, it would be actually possible to rapidly scale up the greenhouse gas sequestration process. And there's a tremendous potential there. By 2050, we will manage actually 15.6 billion tons of greenhouse gases to sequester from the atmosphere. And if you follow this sustainable path, by 2030, we will achieve more than half of it. So that's where we lie, and that's what's the path we have to adopt. And if you now look at the whole systemic picture, that's even more extravagant if you think about it. So you heard from several speakers before, they were talking about the halving greenhouse gas emissions from the energy sector, from the industry sector. And if we couple that up with the food sector, just to draw it down to the planetary boundary for food for 5 billion tons of greenhouse gases, and halve greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector, and at the same time, rapidly and exponentially increase the potential of the carbon sinks to sequester of the greenhouse gas emissions, that will actually lead to more than half of the greenhouse gas reduction from all the sector system-wide by 2030. And if you follow that path, by 2050, we will actually end up with a 614 billion tons of carbon budget, a budget that Christiane Figueres and several other global organizations have been pushing for in order to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we can achieve that by following those paths. And very importantly, and most importantly here, if we manage to do all of those, actually we will manage to reach the drawdown point, a point where we will sequester more greenhouse gases from the atmosphere than we actually emit. Project Drawdown calls it the drawdown point. Some calls it the negative emission by 2039. Without implementing any artificial negative emission technologies, without BECCS, without carbon capture technologies, just using the nature-based solutions, changing our behavior, changing our dietary pattern, and halving emissions from energy, industry, and buildings, and so on and so forth. So that's a huge potential there that's driven by the food sector, and that's what makes it the dark horse here. So it's up to us, actually, what we want to achieve. So do we want to maintain this meat and dairy-based unhealthy diet, unsustainable diet that we're following now? Or do we want to adopt a healthy, sustainable diet that is plant-rich and that is also healthy? And that would imply the particularly rapidly cutting the meat consumption and to draw it down to 14 grams of red meat per day on a plate. If you're wondering if that's impossible, I can testify that actually it is possible because I managed to do that. And I cut down my, I'm not a vegetarian, but I managed to cut down my red meat consumption. And I managed to draw it down because I consume red meat that is sustainably produced, that is free range, that is organically produced every other week or less frequently. And if I consume in a week the red meat, that's 220 grams maximum. So that brings it down to 14 grams or less. So it is possible. We just need to follow that way. And there are several other organizations working on to how to motivate people to bringing in alternatives, what could help people in achieving that, and also to reduce food waste. So that's where we are. So that's on our hand now. If you choose to adopt a sustainable diet, a plant-rich, meat-less sustainable diet, we can actually save the world. And I hope that humanity will do so. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, David, for that inspiring presentation. And let's see what questions we have from the viewers on this hot topic.
Yeah, so there's a question here from Tessa Louise Brooke, saying, what major changes would happen if global meat consumption dropped significantly? Are there any, and I don't know what significant means, by the way, but what in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and what in terms of other potential benefits or downsides of changing global meat production?
Well, there is no short answer to that. I guess that's a long answer, but I guess the main benefit here is the health benefit. You need to think about it, because consumption of massive amount of meat is not only responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions, but it's actually tremendously unhealthy. And we are following that path. And from an evolutionary perspective, from a health perspective, it's actually way healthier when we adopt a plant-rich diet and substantially cut down of the greenhouse, cut down the meat consumption. We don't have to get rid of the meat. That has some co-benefits, that has some biodiversity benefit, that has some benefit even for the agricultural production. But eventually, what the message should be there, that we can't overdo that. If you think about it, an adult human being needs 40 grams of protein every day, and you could actually consume all of it from the meat, from the red meat. But what's happening currently in Europe, we consume 36% more, and in US we are consuming 120% more. So that's where the problem lies. So if we can get this message through and change the production pattern accordingly, that is just enough for maintaining a sustainable life, for maintaining a healthy life, I think that would make a lot of difference here.
Well, thank you very much, David, for your presentation and your insights, and we can follow your work on the Exponential roadmap further on. Thank you so much. We're now moving on to explore more solutions related to food and agriculture. And coming up are 3 presentations followed by a panel talk, and David will come back as an expert. And the first case in this segment is Good to Go.
This is Philip Schuler, Global Movement Coordinator at Too Good To Go. Reducing food waste is the number 3 top solution for combating climate change, according to Project Drawdown. Too Good To Go is the first and largest food waste fighting app. In 14 European countries, it connects consumers with unsold food from shops and restaurants. They also work to combat food waste in the home, where half of all food waste happens. A recent campaign resulted in producers like Unilever and Arla amending date labels to include the words "often good after" to remind consumers that food is safe to eat after best before dates.
Hi, Philip. Nice to have you with us. There is a lot of focus on food waste, finally, I'd say. So how has your work been received?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I definitely think that we're moving in the right way. Food waste is finally getting the attention it deserves. I think research such as Avicii's presented, but also Project Drawdown, have clearly shown that food waste is the most immediate and impactful thing we can do about climate change. It really is something we can all do on a daily basis, and we can start today. So I definitely think that food waste is finally getting the attention, that's for sure.
Wonderful. We'll stay on for the panel. Great. Let's now move to the next solution, and this is a pioneer in the world of burgers.
Meet Kai Turuk, Chief Reputation Officer and Chief Sustainability Officer at Max Burgers, Sweden's most popular hamburger restaurant chain. To help combat global warming, Max has decided to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and remove some of the carbon dioxide they have already emitted. In other words, becoming climate positive. They are doing this by measuring 100% of their product emissions, reducing the amount of emissions, and offsetting 110% of what they do emit. In 2019, Max was recognized by the UN for its climate positive menu, and their climate positive initiative was listed as one of Fast Company magazine's world-changing ideas.
Welcome to the studio, Kai. I must admit I've been enjoying many of your vegan and vegetarian alternatives in the past few years. So why did you decide to go climate positive?
In 2050, the whole world needs to capture more carbon from the atmosphere than we emit to it. That's climate positive. And we realized that as we could do it already in 2018 at Max, that's good news. We can do it then because that means there are literally thousands of companies that can do the same way before 2050. And that's actually what we need. So today we are 8 climate positive companies in the world. We all follow the criteria at clipop.org. It means we measure the whole value chain, we reduce emissions in line with the 1.5 degree target, and we capture more than we emit. So climate positive is starting to be a new revolution, I think, and it's good because it's happening now, because obviously we don't have time to wait.
Thank you very much, Kai, and stay on for the panel. Let's look at the next example. It's from Rentzhog, who work with circular systems.
Meet Per Lars-Hans, the Director of Sustainability at Rentzhog, a European leader in waste management, environmental services and recycling. The company is designing solutions to problems that all megacities and large cities around the world face today, including creating unique ways of circular recovery of detoxified nutrients, like a new method to extract nitrogen from wastewater. Per is also deeply involved in creating environmental targets for Sweden's sea and coastal regions and creating Sweden's industry roadmap to net zero emissions by 2045. His focus at Rentzhog is on circular economy.
Welcome to the studio, Per Lars-Hans. Please tell us a little bit more about the recirculation of nutrients.
Yes. We believe that this is the future that the world will need. It means that we will recirculate nutrients for what today is problematic waste. We have the phosphorus that we can extract out of what today is sludge, but we can do it on a global scale. This is really exponential potential, where all megacities in the world suffer a problem with the sludge. We can turn it into a possibility. The second one is the potassium, where we extract out of what's fly ashes, and we can turn the fly ashes into valuable resources, where the most valuable is the potassium. And a matter of fact, tomorrow we will have a discussion with Brunei that has raised an interest, because we now announced that we are building the first plant, an investment for more than 600 million Swedish crowns or 50 million euros. And then this third one, that's the nitrogen. I think that is probably the most important going forward. We can extract nitrogen out of wastewater. And in 2022, we will have the first plant up and running. And then hopefully we can do it on a global scale, enabling especially developing countries to make sure that we can take the nitrogen out of the water, not bypassing the atmosphere, instead producing directly a fertilizer directly from the water. So we are talking about groundbreaking alternatives here going forward. Very proud of them.
Fascinating. Let's go back to the panel. We have the other guests with us here on the LED screen. Philippe and Avit, the expert, is here. And let's say, Kai, you're with us too here in the studio. We're practicing social distancing, as you know, so we're a bit spread out. So, Avit, what comments do you have after having listened to Philippe, Kai, and Per?
Well, not actually a comment. I would rather have a question too, and it's the same question to all of them. So one of the major challenges that we face when we think about exponential transformation, I mean, we have the solutions ready. We have we see fantastic innovations, and we saw a lot of them in this conference here. But what actually obstructing the implementation of the solutions is the response from the society. So how they respond to your innovation, and when you bring out the solution in the Max Burger, when you were, I know I'm a big fan of your Veggie Lover session, Veggie Lover products, and the Too Good to Go. You're doing incredible jobs out there. So when you brought out this idea, and this innovation and showing this sustainable path, how was the response from the society? Did you kind of felt a backlash there, or did you feel that it's rather well accepted?
Who would like to start? Philip, you go ahead.
Yeah, so I can start. So for our case, it's definitely working really well. We're in 14 different countries around Europe. We're going to launch in the US later this year as well. And you can really see that our model, the way it works, and our app is really something that people value and actually are using on a daily basis. So it's not just what people can do at home about reducing food waste, but also that they want to reduce food waste with retailers, food services, etc. And they're becoming more aware of the issue. And by us basically providing this application, we empower them to make a difference. So not only does it help them to also save a bit of money, but also to make a difference against climate change and against food waste as well. So I think what is really going well with us is that we combine both an issue, so the food waste issue, with something where they will benefit and the planet benefits. So we call it the win-win-win solution. And that is definitely something that is working really well.
Thank you. Kai, the response to you rolled out a green menu quite extensively. What was the response?
Well, we have increased the sales of veggie burgers. I would say that's lacto-vegetarian and fully plant-based, from 2% in 2015 to 22% in 2019. So that's 1,100% increase in 4 years. And that means we reduce emissions really fast. So our guests keep on doing that. So we increased that all the time now. But we have had other responses from the society as well. And I think we're often talking about value chain, that you should think about how that works. But I think we have found something called a values change. So that means we have all these other companies that we feel are a little bit like us that are as well going climate positive. And you wouldn't know where they come from. They come from a music festival, electricity company, mailing service. So from that, I think it's just heartwarming to see that. Yeah, wonderful. Heartwarming, but not climate warming. Mm-hmm. So that's good.
That's important. Per Larssons, your innovation is quite new, but what is the response? You talked about Brunei and one of the Gulf states. The response to this innovation.
I can give you one example from 2018 when we presented our solution in UN in New York. We became the example for innovation and leadership for the phosphorus solution. And after a presentation from the CEO, there were a lot of people that really appreciated our presentation. But of course, we had the liner business also there, and they came us and were really not that happy because we are destroying today's way of working. So they said, please don't do it. Don't even try. So I think we are facing a huge challenge going forward, and we need all support to make sure that we can create circularity. And especially from you, the viewers here, please make sure that you demand circular nutrients going forward. Then we will make it to the global level, definitely.
And we need it because our soils are depleting all over the world, for sure. Avit, more questions from you, please.
One thing that actually kind of challenging me for a while, because I'm also a researcher of social tipping points, where I'm focusing on how can we actually abrupt transform the society. We heard from Kai that the sale has been increased by 1,100% and others. So, what are the incentives here you think that can push? I'm talking about from in a general sense, from the government, from the industries like you who are manufacturer and who are. So, what are the incentives there, kind of to push the society to abruptly change and to transform abruptly?
Well, I think one question is about why did we change, and we're a family-owned company, so we can do what we like. That means we want to do the right thing. We exist to make good food in a good way for a good world. But I think how we change society, I think one of the most important things we do right now is to change the narrative. And I'm so happy about we don't have time right now, because we're not focusing too much on the problems. We've known about those forever. We're focusing now on the solutions. And the thing that changes when you're doing that is how you feel, how you act, the results that you give. And I think Climate Positive is just for that too. We can create a hope around climate change that we actually can do something. So it doesn't have to be a slow process to ruin, just make it slower. We can actually, in the future, restore the climate, which is the really, really sane thing to do. And I think about a tipping point, changing the narrative of that will get a lot of people working.
When you say changing the narrative, please elaborate.
Yeah, so I mean, from one perspective, we're always talking now about what's going wrong with the world. And I think so many young people today are feeling this kind of climate depression of different varieties. And you really do feel depressed when you hear about a problem and you can't do anything about it. You're just waiting and waiting and waiting. So the grown-ups should do something, or someone else should do something. But the thing is, what's happening when you're actually part of the change is that you feel different. You're feeling like you have at least some part of control. And so I think we're just getting more innovative with framing this issue in a new way, that it's possible, it's already happening, and we're going to learn so much in the future. So from that perspective, I think more and more people are feeling hope. And when they're feeling that kind of energy, they're doing more. So that's where we need to go.
When you hear this, what do you say with the too good to go concept? The feeling of being able to contribute, some sense of control, and also the narrative. Does that ring a bell?
No, 100%. So I definitely think, for me, the tipping point, what is going to help us towards climate change, but also in this food crisis, is really going to come down to people respecting and valuing food again. Because I think when people ask me what is the main reason for people wasting so much food, it really comes down to we have no idea where food is coming from anymore. It's coming from longer distances. We are spending less and less money on food as well, on a monthly income. And also we are becoming more and more abundance. We're getting more and more abundance of food as well. So we're overbuying, our fridges are full, we're being overwhelmed, specifically at this time during the pandemic, what is going on as well with what is going on at home as well at the moment. So I think when we are reaching a point where we can help to bring this narrative and this message across, that we need to start respecting food and we need to start valuing food, we will no longer waste food. I think it sounds very simple, but it really does come down to something as simple as that. Because in Europe alone, half of all food that is being wasted is wasted at home. And it really comes down to very basic little changes in terms of perception, in mindset, changing behaviors and habits, which will help us to drive this change.
Thank you, Philip. You're nodding a bit. Please comment.
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. I think a strong narrative can impact a lot, and it's all about trust as well. So people do feel that actually what they are doing is worth. I often get the question from the general public, actually, does my contribution really worth it? Because I'm just a tiny individual in this whole universe. So if I do make a change, does it even count? Well, often people don't. What people don't think about, actually, if you think about the climate change problem from the beginning, it's actually the individual action that led to this problem where we are at now. So if we could be the part of the problem, we can also be the part of the solution here.
Thank you. Per Larsson's food waste, food nutrients, it's connected to your business. What are your comments to what Keynote is doing and what Philip is doing?
The challenge is that today's way of working is a linear system. It means that the food waste, what it turns up in the end, unfortunately, aren't brought back to the lands, the nutrients. We need to make sure that we close the loop, definitely. And we have one critical problem in Europe, and that's the legislation. Because the legislation prevents from using what has been waste before. You can't put it back on the fields again. You can just put things that has been mined, and that's a part of the legislation. That's why we need to import as much as 90% of the phosphorus that we need to use and fertilize the lands of Europe. So a very big big important step is that we need to change legislation, change perspectives, value the resources, make sure that we secure the resources for future generations. And phosphorus is of the nutrients, that's the one that is finite. It means that we are ending it if we don't take care of it.
So Per, as you talk about legislation, so what's going on there? What pressure is there on the EU, for instance?
I really hope now, because what's happening in EU with the Green Deal is that they say they're gonna look on every legislation, and especially I like them to focusing on, of course, nutrient recovery, making sure that we don't waste it as we do it today. So make sure that we keep it in the system, keep it in the loop, and create possibilities to recircle it back. Outside of Europe, it's possible, but in Europe, we are prohibited. We can't use it.
But this means you need cleaner waste streams, correct?
No, we need to change perspective, because, as a matter of fact, our way of working, when we extract the phosphorus, it doesn't contain any heavy metals at all. But when we mine it from the mines of Morocco, the high content of cadmium and uranium, that's what's are being then brought to the fields of Europe. So we need to change perspective. So in the long term, we are now destroying the fields by putting nutrients that contains unwanted substances. But we can produce something that doesn't contain anything unwanted at all, but we're not allowed to do it. So we need to totally change mindset and change legislation.
And here people watching can go into the We Don't Have Time app and give you climate view, love, and review what you're doing, all of you, and support your work. Thank you so much, Philippe. Thank you, Per Larssons, and thank you, Kai Turek. And thank you, Avit.
Thank you very much.
We will now listen to two more fascinating keynote presentations, and we're starting with Anna Rickert from WWF.
This is Anna Rickert. With a background in sustainable food systems, she is a senior expert at WWF Sweden, where she recently has created a climate certification for food and a meat guide to help consumers make responsible choices.
Hello, Anna. Welcome to the studio. We're waving from a little bit of a distance. Go ahead. You have our attention.
So happy to be here today and to speak to all of you about what we're doing at WWF Sweden to make food that we eat more sustainable. And we made the analysis, as you all know, that climate and biodiversity are, food is the main driver for the climate impact and for changes in the biodiversity. And so we decided that we need to get a perspective on the people's plates. We need to move to the consumption side and to influence what people are eating. So we and partners decided to develop a concept called One Planet Plate, which is launched in Sweden since 2018. And this concept actually has been launched and is implemented in schools and in restaurants in Sweden, eaten by young people and served by professionals who are really, really proud to contribute to a more sustainable food system. And now I will take you into a bit more about what is the content of this One Planet Plate. Well, we decided to establish a climate criterion for a plate. And we calculated a climate budget and made a number of assumptions that took us all the way down to per year, per week, and per meal figure. So we are now saying that 1.5 kilos of carbon dioxide equivalents will help to keep us within the 1.5 trajectory. And this is a target that has taken off. It is used today by companies, by politicians to set goals. We need for more companies to do this, of course, and for more politicians to do this. But it's becoming a benchmark of what is a meal that is within the climate boundary. But as you all should know, it's not only climate we need to speak about. We also need to address the concept of the issue of biodiversity. So we decided on criteria for biodiversity that steers away from deforestation and that helps us with biodiversity measures in the agricultural landscape. So there are criteria that also stimulate the local biodiversity. It's really important not to miss out on the biodiversity part when we speak about the climate. So bring both those issues onto the plate. And it's all about the less but better for meat, and to increase the vegetable production and to get the vegetable consumption to be more sustainable. Now, I think you all know that we are not actually there right now. Today's consumption is not sustainable. So we need to increase the group of people who are actually wanting to make more sustainable choices about their food. And therefore, WWF Sweden also went into a project together with the Olympic Committee in Sweden to address what the food that people eat that are sporty, the high level achievers in sports, what do they actually eat, and how can we help them to challenge the myth that meat needs to be on every plate, and to help them move towards more sustainability and more vegetable products on the plate. Not a full vegetarian plate, and we're not actually saying that everyone needs to be vegetarian. We don't even think that. But we need more vegetarian products on the plate, and we need to dispel the myth that meat is the centerpiece of a meal. So this man, he is actually an Olympic sailor, and he makes strong moves in his daily life, and has discovered that it's quite easy to actually replace products and to move towards a more plant-based plate and a one planet plate. And I would like to send a signal to all of you. I heard Kai Turek from Max speak earlier about the depression that can come when you don't realize that what you can do, for example, for the climate issue. And I mean, food is the daily choice in everybody's life that you can actually affect. And it is very easy to take steps to get your plate within the planetary boundaries. This is a tool. It's available in Swedish on our WWF website, but it's not complicated. It has to do with lowering the climate impact of food and getting the food more biodiversity friendly. And I want to say we're also moving into a project where we're addressing what diets that young people eat in a European level. So eat for change, be the change that you want to see, and go out and do some action. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Anna-Rika. You'll stay on here in the background because you're coming back for some Q&As.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. The next speaker, her name is Josefin Kihlberg, and she will now add her knowledge.
This is Josefin Kihlberg. She has spent the past 15 years working on environmental issues related to farming and is now with Swedish Sigill, a Swedish organization that provides quality, climate and sustainability certifications for food.
Hello, Josefin. Welcome to the studio. Go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. This is very exciting to be here today. And I'm here to talk to you about a Svensk Sigill climate certification. And basically this climate certification from Svensk Sigill is for food and flowers, and it is based on Nordic condition, what works here in the Northern Hemisphere. And it is currently on, we have hundreds of farms all over Sweden that are certified, and we also had our first Finnish grower that became certified just a few weeks ago. So this is very exciting. We are moving into Finland. And so this has been around since 2010. And just a year ago, we let researchers from the Swedish Institute RISE look at our climate certification and also look at what measures are the most important to do in order to reduce climate impact from the food sector in Sweden. And what they came up with was pretty much what we have been doing for the last 10 years, which felt really good. We also found some new interesting projects that we're going to start. And in September, we're launching a new version of this climate certification. And so we are very much based in science. What does science tell us to do? But we also need the farmer perspective. So we let farmers have an input on what is actually doable on the farm. And since this is a certification, there are independent audits and there are control agents that come out to the farm and check that the rules are actually being followed. So what it comes down to is a food label that is currently on hundreds of items, and this is a great value for consumers. You can find it in grocery stores, flower shops, etc., all over Sweden. And many consumers are looking for items that will have a lower climate impact. And what you can do is look for this label, and it will be sure you can be certain that this has a lower impact than a comparable food. So we are very much focused on the production. So what is actually being done then? Well, the farmers are doing a great job with this, and what they do is focus on the measures that have the biggest impact, as well as the ones that are possible to change. So having as much output as possible from a farm is very important. We make inputs to the farm, and we also have to have the output. So healthy plants and animals is key. We also have measures on feed choice and fertilization. And fertilization is important because you can have nitrous oxide emissions come from when you fertilize the plants. And this is a very powerful greenhouse gas. Whatever we can do to reduce this is very important. So we focus very much on what can be done to optimize the plant's health and growth. And we also have rules on energy efficiency, and this is mostly important on crop and vegetable farms where this is a bigger part of their emissions. And of course, renewable energy is a very high percentage on these farms. But we cannot only look at climate change because we might do damage to our planet in other ways. It is very important that we keep track of other sustainability issues, which is why we have rules that mean that the farmers have to increase biodiversity in the agricultural landscape in different ways. And we also feel very strongly that if we are going to eat meat and eat animals, then we need to make sure that they have not only been healthy, but also been able to express their natural behaviors. And we want to also reduce the risk of nutrients leaching into lakes and rivers and oceans. And when we do need to irrigate, we make sure that it comes from a sustainable source. So this is, you can feel certain that when you buy food that has this label, that it comes from farmers that really do everything they can to reduce the climate impact. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Josephine. And please bring on questions to Anna Rickert and to Josephine. We have Nick ready, as always, with the app, he can harvest your questions. So let's see. Now we have a great lineup here. So thanks for your presentation, Josephine and Anna. Before I go to Nick, I'm curious. You have the labeling, and you talk about the One Planet food, and I'm sure there are many viewers all over the world thinking, "Oh, how do I best go about this?" I mean, what? And also in other aspects, how do you incentivize yourself in the easiest way? Is it health aspects, or is it climate aspects, or could it be that you have to have your individual choice here? What do you say? How to motivate yourself to go more climate friendly in terms of eating?
Well, if I start, then I think the motivation will be different depending on who you are, exactly as you said. And that's why we really need to have many flowers out there blooming. So this is one initiative, which is a wonderful initiative. One Plant Plate is another, and there are many more. So I would just say, go with the flow. Let many. I mean, in Sweden, we have a saying called, you don't see the forest for all the trees. Let there be many trees. Let there be many initiatives out there. And don't start a war between organic or non-organic, or meat or non-meat. They all serve to develop a more sustainable food system.
Josephine, you agree? You're nodding.
I can only agree. I feel like there is room for everybody to improve here. And I think the importance is that we keep moving. If we want to move towards the sustainable future, the only thing we can do is just keep moving. We need to constantly move. That's the most important
and
thing.
find our driver, our individual driver. I was talking to Nick the other day. We both of us had visited an industrial slaughterhouse, and that was a big incentive for both of us to, well, change our diets. Let's say that. So take questions now, please, Nick.
Yeah, mine was in Kenya. Where was yours?
Mine was in Skåne in 1985. So that's the last time I put a piece of meat in my mouth. But that's just my personal reflection. So go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, okay. So there's a lot of people kind of agreeing with the general statements that you've been making. I haven't really got specific questions to you, but I think we need to, perhaps in a sense, slightly reflect on the debate we had before. There seemed to be a sort of an American debate in Washington. We had guests there, and the kind of European reaction on the app. You were quite careful in the language you chose just now, which was that, everything can improve. But we also had a presentation earlier on the situation of degraded land around the world. I don't know if there's degraded land in Sweden, but that, I understand, is linked with intensive agriculture. Where do we balance these arguments? How do we find some common ground between those who don't like meat, those that do like meat, those that believe intensive agriculture, industrial agriculture will get us out of the food crisis problem to come, versus the wider topics?
Well, I think you have to realize that consumers are, there's a wide span of different types of consumers. And you also have to see that some issues are best addressed in the production scene. You're not going to get very many consumers interested in desertification or regenerative agriculture. They just want to know, how can they choose when they're in the retail store or in the restaurant? How can they choose something that's a bit better? And this is to want to be better is a deep driving force for many people. Speaking of driving forces, the improvement. So we actually need for politicians and for retailers and for companies to do their job in getting the production issues right, so that it becomes easier for consumers.
Anna Josephine, is there a danger in yet another label? I mean, there are many labels around. Could people get confused, or is it just you can choose sort of, again, depending on your value based, if you want to, one of your values, if you want to go for the climate certificate label, or if you're going to want to go for the organic label, or what are your thoughts about the sort of the amount of labels out there related to the environment?
Well, I think you always have to have some sort of knowledge behind what the label stands for, and if you need to do a little bit of homework, I think, when it comes to labels, so that but I think that there is definitely room for quite a lot of labels before, as you say, you have consumers that have different driving forces and different interests, and therefore they will find a label that works for them,
And I was going to say, I mean, quite a lot of labels when it comes to cars or jeans brands, or I don't think there's actually too much labels out there. I think there's a need for something that shows us third-party, verified, credible improvements in the food systems, and that's what labels do for us.
Well, thank you very much, Josephine. Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you, as always, Nick. And let's now move to the next segment. It's now time to conclude this segment with another keynote presentation, and this one is from Chad Frischmann from Project Drawdown.
This is Chad Frischmann. As a research director of Project Drawdown, he has assessed the most effective climate solutions in the world, determining if, how, and when the world can start reducing the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere.
Hello there, Chad. Great to have you with us. You're the final keynote today, and we're very excited to listen to you. So go ahead.
Hello all. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. It's an absolute pleasure to be here on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day and celebrating all these wonderful events throughout this week. So for those of you who are just turning into this program, I know there's been other of my colleagues who've been talking about drawdown in the past few sessions, but for those of you just turning in today, let me give you a definition of what we mean when we talk about drawdown. Drawdown is that point in time when atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases begin to decline on a year-to-year basis. It's that point when we take out more greenhouse gases than we put into Earth's atmosphere. Now, we're all concerned about climate change, and we should be. It's the greatest challenge humanity has ever faced, and it's one that's affecting us today, affecting our children tomorrow, and our grandchildren, and future generations to come. Perhaps for the first time in human history, the decisions we make as a generation today truly have meaning for our entire species and this entire planet. Climate change is, at its core, though, a symptom of a deeper problem. It is a sickness. It is a response of the system telling us what's going on, and the system is working. It's a sickness that's affecting our atmosphere, our terrestrial systems, our oceans, and our human social and economic way of life. So how do we solve the problem? How do we begin the process of stopping global warming and beginning to reverse its effects? Well, the only way we know how is to draw down, to avoid putting greenhouse gases up and to pull down what's already there. Now, I know this sounds daunting. I know this sounds impossible, but as we've heard throughout this week and throughout this program, there are real workable technologies and practices that exist today. Real, tangible solutions that, when taken together as a system of solutions, can start the process of reversing global warming. Now, I want to try to do something with you all today. All at your homes, everybody watching here, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and think and imagine some things. I'm going to ask you some questions. Just imagine things if you can for me. I want you to try to imagine a solar panel. Can you do that? Can you put your hand out and imagine touching it? Now, you may not want to, but can you do it? Can you imagine walking out to a field, to a wind turbine at its base and looking up and seeing the blades spin? Can you just about feel the wind flowing against your face? Can you imagine walking on a hike through a protected forest? Can you imagine putting your arms around that bark of that tree and hugging? Can you feel that bark? Can you imagine a farm, an organic farm, or possibly a pasture land with cows? Can you smell that manure? Can you just imagine trees growing on that pasture land? Can you imagine that? It might be a little bit more challenging, but it's possible, isn't it? Can you imagine your favorite plate of pasta? Can you just about taste how delicious that is? Can you smell that? Now I want to ask you something else. Can you imagine going out and touching a circular economy? Can you just about imagine feeling sustainability? Can you imagine degrowth? How about this? Can you imagine the smile on a young person's face when he or she receives a diploma after 12 to 13 years of schooling? Can you give that person a hug? Can you feel that? Now, I want you to open your eyes wherever you are in the world today. My point here is that while we need really important high-level thinking around degrowth or healthy growth, surely sustainability and circular economy and all these really important frameworks, we need to be able to touch, taste, smell, and feel the solutions that are right in front of us in order for every individual at all scales to be able to act. So we have the technologies, we have the practices. It's not a matter of the science. It's not a matter of even the economics or the financial system. It's a matter of the will to move farther and faster than we thought possible. And what we need to do is change the way we talk about and think about climate change. We need to set a marker on the horizon pointing us to the future that we actually want, the future that we choose to have, a future where stopping and beginning to reverse global warming is possible. And as a starting point, we need to change the way we approach this discourse. We need to move away from problem fixing and fear and conflict and move towards solutions and towards the possibility of what those solutions can achieve when we work as a collaboration, when we link arms together as a species, working together in tandem with nature towards opportunities to create the future that we actually want. Now, I work with a team of researchers from all over the world. And for the last 6 years, we've mapped, modeled, and described 80 existing technologies of practice that we know exist today And they're already scaling. They're already being implemented all over the world. And they do one or more of three things. First, replace fossil fuel-based technologies and practices with clean, renewable alternatives. Reduce consumption through technological efficiencies and behavior change, okay? And three, restore carbon to useful forms through restoring the natural carbon cycle. It's the only way we know how, with certainty, to bring carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and return it to our terrestrial systems. It's through a process we call photosynthesis. The magic and miracle of this process has been evolved for millions upon millions of years that pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and stores it in plants' biomass and soil organic carbon. It's through a combination, and only through a combination of these three mechanisms, that drawdown becomes possible. Now, what are some of these solutions? You've heard a lot about them throughout this week. Here are 20 of the top 80 existing technologies and practices. Now, this represents the latest research from Project Drawdown. This is our newest results, newest research that was released this year in 2020. This is the ranking of one of our scenarios. You'll see to the right of this slide, that's numbers in gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent, reduced or avoided or sequestered over a 30-year period from 2020 to 2050. One number represents a scenario 1, the second represents scenario 2. These are aligned to a 2-degree warming target and a 1.5-degree warming target. But what you will notice right away is in this list, there are nearly every form of human activity is addressed. From electricity to generation to food to our health and education systems to industry and buildings and agriculture and livestock and our land use and how we interact with the world today. So I want you to imagine that world of the future. I want you to imagine that world in 2030 and 2050. And what will that world look like? We will have renewable energy systems that take energy from our natural systems, like every other form of life on this planet, and use it for our purposes, both on land and in the water and offshore. We will use the sun in all of its majesty to provide us with energy in our urban environments and in rural environments. We will change the way we move around in the world using electrifying our systems so that we can move with the speed and electric that we need and improve our well-being while taking care of the environment. We will change the way we do business by not having to travel vast distances, but actually being able to work from our homes and having more free time to enjoy our communities. We will change the way we move our goods and service around the world to be more efficient and to reduce the amount of need by changing the way we even produce our system, by designing our materials so that they are designed from the beginning to be used over and over again for greater production. And when we instead of just using resources, extracting from the earth, we can change that and use natural materials, producing bamboo that will allow us to produce use for buildings, for bridges, for bicycles, even for clothing can be used from bamboo. This is an amazing natural substance. But when we take currently degraded land, we can also restore our forests, improving for both sequestration in both temperate as well as tropical regions. But not just restoring our forests and biodiversity, we need to protect what's already there and protect our biodiversity, protect our forests and all the carbon sink that's stored in that soil and in that biomass. We need to protect and restore our coastal wetlands and all the tangible, real cascading benefits that come from them. We need to reimagine how we work with our oceans to restore kelp forests, to do ocean farming so that we can produce materials that we could use on the terrestrial systems in the ocean while at the same time restoring our oceans, reducing ocean acidification, and creating a healthy marine ecosystems. We need to change the way we produce our food to make it more regenerative, both in terms of our annual cropping as well as our livestock production. There are ways that we can produce dairy and meat and benefit the planet by restoring soil and sequestering more carbon than we're putting out. We need to change the way we're consuming to, yes, while we can still consume meat and other dairy products, animal-based proteins, we need to reduce that overconsumption to healthy levels and to reduce what we're eating overall, while at the same time lifting up those people in other countries who are going hungry to healthy levels so we can have enough food and sustenance for all people. And to do that, we need to dramatically reduce our food waste, which is 30 to 40% of all food is not even consumed, while 800 million people on this planet are going hungry. We can change the entire food system by reducing food and consuming a healthy diet. And imagine this world where everybody has equal quality and access to education. Imagine that world and all the greatness that humanity and brilliance that humanity can have when everybody on this planet has equal quality and access to education, as well as equal quality and access to family planning resources, voluntary reproductive health clinics, contraception, and freedom of choice devoid of persecution. All of these solutions of 2030, of 2050 exist today. In a worldwide web of all these intersecting systems that work together to create how we as a species interact with the planet today, and what we need, how we need to interact with the planet in the future. So is drawdown possible? The answer is absolutely, but only when we challenge systems, only when we rethink how we work with systems to make them beneficial to humanity and to the planet. So we can achieve a 2-degree warming target, and we can achieve a 1.5 degree warming target when we look as all of these solutions as a system of solutions that, when taken together, can achieve drawdown and indeed go well beyond drawdown. We think beyond a 1.5 degree target to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. When we implement a system of solutions by challenging the way we do business today, moving away from exploitation and extraction towards restoration and regeneration, let's switch the way we think about our economy and social structures and create regenerative economy, a regenerative society, because in doing so, we solve the Sustainable Development Goals and creating opportunities for the future that we want. We can create the future that we know we want, we know we need today with real, workable, tangible solutions, but only when we address this as a system of solutions. We are working to build a regenerative future for all people, because for the first time, we are the regeneration. No more generation X, Y, and Z. We are all in this together. This is an intergenerational movement that we can link arms together as the regeneration and create the future that we want today with solutions that are at hand. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chad Frischmann, for your passionate presentation and for the wonderful and important work you do at Project Drawdown. It's now time to conclude this 4th day of the broadcast. And with me, as always, I have Ingmar Rentzhog, CEO and founder of We Don't Have Time, and Nick, who's been up and down on and off the stage all day, and Johan Falk from Exponential Roadmap. Johan Falk, Project Drawdown and Exponential Roadmap, you work in similar ways, similar methods. How do you collaborate, and can you collaborate even more?
Yes, actually, Project Drawdown is actually one of our key partners. So we build a lot of our work on Project Drawdown, but also fuse it with other type of research. So it's absolutely very complementary. So we are in partnerships.
Very good. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Nick, it's been quite a sort of a hectic day for you, and lots of comments online on the app. Reflections from you on today's show.
I think an interesting reflection on that agriculture is still a very polarizing topic, and that many of the scientific assessments over recent years have indicated broadly what sustainable agriculture might be. But there obviously are differing opinions on use of pesticides, use of GMOs versus organic agriculture, intensive agriculture. And clearly, I'm not sure that we resolved that question here to everybody's satisfaction today. So we shall see how that debate proceeds.
Well, thank you, Nick Nuttall. And Ingmar, what are your most important reflections from today's broadcast?
My reflection is that food engages us all.
Indeed.
Myself, I'm actually raised on a small farm in northern Sweden. My parents grew all food that our family was eating. And I learned one thing because of that. That is, you have to respect nature. We need nature, but nature don't need us. And I understand that in order to feed the whole planet with food, we need efficient ways of doing agriculture. But if we lose that respect, I think we will not achieve that goal if we kill the last bee on Earth. And I think that is something everyone that has taken part in this conference here today needs to think of.
Well, thank you very much, Ingmar Rentzhog. Thank you very much, Nick Nuttall and Johan Falk, for today's show and for the conclusions. And as always, we want to thank, well, the viewers, the experts, and also we do have a great crew working with us here. It's not just us up here, right? There's many people doing a fantastic job to make this happen. And talking about many people, let's finish off today's show with showing a video. The video is from Fridays for Future, and it's from the climate strike in Stockholm on Valentine's Day. And please come back tomorrow for our last day of broadcast.
My name's Alman Grimstead, and I've lived here for 20 years in Sweden.
I'm Lisa. I'm from Germany, but I'm currently studying in Karlstad in Sweden.
I'm Jonas Hugesson. I'm a teacher outside Stockholm.
Mona Andersson. Jag är 83 år. Har varit skådespelerska.
My name's Elizabeth Kupja.
I am Mustafa Sharif, and I am working as an urban planner, originally from Iraq, but right now I am working in Stockholm.
Jag hoppas på att de ska förstå hur viktigt det är.
My hope is that governmental leaders will take the action needed, also the action they promised by signing the Paris Agreement.
Politikerna, det är ju de som måste göra någonting. Och de bara pratar, men de gör ju inget.
I think a lot more attention needs to be focused on this subject.
It seems the Earth is becoming a little more fragile for every year, and we have to change something. I'm here today because I've been so happy and proud of Greta Thunberg and Fridays for Future, and it seemed like such a strong and clear voice.
It's one of our mission to be here to support these kids, and it's a way to show that we care about our planet.